Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Welcome for joining us at the March 24th Albany Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We will call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Donaldson?
Here.
Commissioner McLeod?
Here.
Commissioner Moman?
Here.
Commissioner Pilch?
Present.
And Chair Waddy?
Present. Thank you. That moves us to item 3 on our agenda, ex parte communications. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose this evening?
No.
Seeing head nods. All right. With that, we will move on to item 4 on our agenda, which is the consent calendar. The consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted on by one motion. Approval of the consent calendar means that the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. This evening, we have 2 items on our consent calendar. First up, item 4-1, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from March 10th, 2021. And item 4-2, this was an item continued from March 10th. This is planning application 20-054, design review for a second story addition at 1248 Brighton Avenue. Do any commissioners wish to pull either of these items off the consent calendar? Commissioner Donaldson.
Yes, I'll pull both items, please.
Okay. With that, sure. Why don't we go ahead then and just bring it back to item 4-1, then the meeting minutes. Would you like to just jump in with your thoughts on this one?
On page 5, regarding the project on Cerrito Street, I think, 830 Cerrito, it said, I don't have the line 10, that the structure would be lift 18 inches. My recollection was 33 inches. So I think the minutes should reflect the correct number. That's all I have in the minutes. And maybe staff would want to check that, but I think that was 33 inches. Okay. And then on, is that all right then? Can I go on to the other item then?
Sure. Although if we're wanting to have discussion on the Brighton Street item, why don't we go ahead and conclude item 4-1 on the minutes first, so we can just tie that one up. Okay, great. Why don't we then go ahead and,
modification, I could move approval of the minutes then.
Okay. Why don't we first take public comment though, just since we're parsing these out individually. Chris, is there anyone in the public queue who'd like to speak on item 4-1, the meeting minutes from March 10th?
There are no hand raised for that item.
Okay. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And Commissioner Donaldson, was that a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval of the minutes with that one change.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Then on that, on that motion, Commissioner McLeod. Commissioner Moman.
Yes.
Commissioner Pilch.
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Yes.
Yes. And I vote yes as well. So the meeting minutes pass 5-0. We'll move on to item 4-2. Commissioner Donaldson, since you pulled this off consent, would you like a presentation from staff or the sponsor, or do you want to just jump into your commentary?
I don't think we need a staff presentation on this. So let's see, a couple of issues here. First of all, I want to say that I really did misunderstand the staff report at the last time, and I noticed the applicant was confused by what I said. It is true that the FAR of this project will be 0.54, and I can confirm that by looking at the current staff report, and I'd missed that in the first staff report. These projects where you have an AUD and a conditional use permit are getting confusing to me, and I really erred on that. I do want to say that we have requested a redesign, and I'm fairly satisfied with it. I'm not, maybe not perfectly, not completely satisfied with it, but I'm not sure I would recommend any changes. I really like the fact that the modification they've made does emphasize the entrance to the ADU, and it makes as Commissioner Moman actually suggested, it makes a single family home look kind of like a townhome. But I'm okay with that. I think the critical part will be how the paint colors change from one side of the building to the other, and I'll trust the applicant to have good taste in that matter. We don't have jurisdiction over that anyway. So personally, I'm okay with it, but I'm interested in what other commissioners, including both architects on the commission, have to say. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Pilch.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say I'm very happy with the changes, and I'm grateful to the applicants for having considered our remarks and made the changes, and I'm fully ready to support this project. Thanks.
Commissioner Momin.
Yeah, I agree with. I basically have the same word as Commissioner Pilch has. I appreciate the efforts the applicant has taken to respect our suggestions.
Great. And Commissioner McLeod, you had your hand raised also.
Yeah, I just want to thank the applicant for, doing some of the modifications, working in good faith to address some of the concerns raised. I still think it has the similar planes recess. The door is more prominent now for the second unit, or the ADU, I should say. So it's starting to look a little bit more like a separate address, separate place. And I'm fine with the gable on the end. It kind of mimics the front gable on the other end gable. So, I think that's a good move. Overall, I think it's a nice little project, and I'm happy to support it.
Great. Well, I won't take up much more time. I agree with what my fellow commissioners have said, and also agree that the changes to the roof form, I think, are a really great change and just make that significant enough difference to really make this be a seamless addition. So I'm ready to support this project as well. We should similarly go ahead. If there's no further comments from the commissioners, we should really quickly turn to public comment and see if there's anyone who wishes to speak on this item. Now is your opportunity to speak on this. Is there anyone in the queue, Chris?
No, there are no hands raised.
Okay. Seeing no one wishing to speak on this, public comment is closed. And would somebody like to make a motion?
Sure. With that, I'm pleased to make a motion to approve a planning application 20054 design review for a second story addition at 1248 Brighton.
Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Great. Second by Commissioner Momin. On that motion, then, Commissioner McLeod. Commissioner Pilch.
Yes.
Commissioner Momin.
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I vote yes as well. So that also is approved with a 5-0 vote. As a reminder to the project sponsor, please do keep your story polls up for the 14-day appeal period. With that, we will turn to item 5 on our agenda, which is announcements and communication, of which there appear to be none. And we will move on to public comment. Public comment for this evening, especially for those of you who are tuning in for the first time. This is public comment for items that are not otherwise on tonight's agenda. So if you're wishing to speak on the Albany Bowl item, this is not your moment to speak. We will separately call public comment for that item. So this is unrelated public comment addressed to the Planning Commission. So on that, each member of the public is given up to 3 minutes to speak during general public comment. Chris, can you see if there's anyone from the public who's in the queue to speak?
Yeah, we have 2 hands raised. The first is Clay Larson. Clay, you have 3 minutes to speak, beginning now.
Thanks. I brought the same issue up the last 2 commission meetings. It basically concerns the availability of information to commissioners prior to a meeting. At the February 24th Planning and Zoning Committee meeting, just by way of review, staff announced that they would no longer be able to forward emails from one commissioner from a commissioner to the rest of the commission. Staff claimed that this was based on advice from the city attorney, and staff noted that there would be a fuller explanation at the then upcoming Brown Act training. Then at the March 10th, 2021 commission meeting, staff provided a presentation on the results of the San Pablo specific plan, and they didn't provide any report prior to this. Their explanation was that as a matter of a matter of practice, they don't make presentations available prior to the meeting, but again, there wasn't even any report available. And again, they indicated this would be discussed at the Brown Act training. Well, I watched the Brown Act training, And I don't believe either of these topics were discussed. I was surprised that the members of the commission, I assumed somebody attended, didn't bring up the issue. But anyway, at this point, I think the commission deserved the promised full explanation of those two decisions, and so does the public. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Next speaker is Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, so this is just a general public question, fully transparent. You know, there's been a lot of talk over many years about sidewalk issues in Albany, and cracks or trees have caused, roots to grow. And, if you're on your rollerblades or something, sure, it makes a good ramp, to jump off of or something on the sidewalk. But if you're elderly, it becomes an obstacle, So let's say you have a homeowner who wants to fix the sidewalk or doesn't, then the city does or doesn't, and then it's a 50% issue because the owner is half responsible and the city's half responsible for the sidewalk. There could be some confusion. I could foresee some confusion for a homeowner, especially when buying a property. Is that something disclosed? And when you buy a property, and all of a sudden the sidewalk, and that wasn't included in the estimate or something. So I was just wondering if it's possible next meeting or something. I don't know how it works. If this is the right commission to ask for some sort of update on, or some sort of transparency for public outreach, at least for private property. I think this is the private property commission, and then traffic and safety is city streets and sidewalks.
Yes.
Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. But this is still 50%. So now I'm speaking on the 50% side for the homeowners. So I don't know if that would be on this purview of this commission. I was just wondering, I was kind of interested, I could probably explain it to my grandpa, I don't know if there's been any updates, if it's still 50-50, or what sort of sidewalk, repairs or something for the homeowner would be great. Some options, if the city has different options, rubber sidewalk, if they have some sort of recycled tire or recycled rubber, something softer. That seems more, easier if you have roots growing. Maybe the rubber might give a little bit and it won't crack or something because the roots. So maybe plant, trees where the roots are. Just go ahead and install the rubber cement around the trees. I don't know, but keep up the good work. I was just looking forward for some more information on the 50-50 responsibilities of the homeowner in the city on just a sidewalk update. That's all, just the sidewalk, please. Thank you.
And time's up. Next speaker is Ed Fields. Ed, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Good evening, commissioners. I just wanted to comment very briefly on the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, and wanted you to keep in mind that plan when you consider the next item on your agenda, and what that item would look like, that development project, if our zoning code allowed 6 stories or 8 stories. And what it would look like if our zoning code allowed 100 units per acre. And what if the developer didn't need to use a density bonus, but simply Albany's own inclusionary housing ordinance? Would we still get all the very low income units? So I just want you to keep that in mind. Thank you.
There are no more hands up right now.
Okay, this is last call for general public comment. If anyone else wishes to speak, now is the time to raise your hand. Seeing none, we will go ahead then and close general public comment and move on to item 7 on our agenda, which is action items. There are no action items this evening for our consideration, which brings us on to item 8, new business. We have one item under new business, which is the study session for the proposed mixed-use development at 540 San Pablo Avenue, also known as the former Albany Bowl site for everyone. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Anne. And just for the public's knowledge, we do have 3 presentations this evening from staff, our transportation planner, as well as the project applicant. We will then, as a commission, reserve some time to ask questions of any of those 3 folks presenting. And then after our questions have been answered, we will go ahead and open it up to public comment before the commission turns it back for discussion and comments tonight. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Planning Manager Ann Hirsch.
Great. Bear with me as I share my screen with you. So before you tonight is a preliminary review, also known as a study session for design review and density bonus request for 540 San Pablo Avenue. As Chair Waddy mentioned, this is formerly the Albany Bowl. So as Chair Waddy mentioned, we're doing things a little bit differently this evening. I will provide the commission and members of the public with a planning presentation that broadly gives you some background on the project and the process. A number of the public comments that were received focused in on transportation related issues. So we asked our transportation planner to provide a brief presentation for the commission and the public to answer those questions. We also have the applicant presentation, which they will provide to the commission and members of the public to present their project. And Chair Waddy outlined the process. We will hold public comment and then of course receive commission feedback. And I want to emphasize so that it's clear for everyone, this is a study session. There will not be any action taken tonight. This is a preliminary review. So this is really an opportunity to present the preliminary plans and also to receive feedback from members of the public. So just to give you some background, the subject site is 2.18 acres, currently has the recently closed Albany Bowl, as well as some miscellaneous single-story retail uses. The site zoning is San Pablo commercial, which allows for mixed-use development by right. There's also an overlay zone of planned residential commercial that is on the site. One of the questions that came up in the course of reviewing correspondence is the proposed siting. One thing to mention is that there is an access easement between Sutter Health and the subject site. And this is something that is being preserved as part of the project redevelopment. But that is something that we'll get into a little bit in greater detail, but that is a consideration in the plan review. And lastly, the site is served by an AC transit stop, which is on San Pablo Avenue, right in front of the bowling alley building. And this is also within a half-mile walk to El Cerrito Plaza BART. And this is a snapshot of the zoning map. And you can see that it is San Pablo commercial. It goes through to Adams Street. This is a vicinity map. The important thing to note with this is that the subject site is currently comprised of 9 separate parcels. And as part of this project scope, the applicant will be dissolving that and merging this all into one parcel. So it will go from 9 separate parcels into one parcel. And this is an existing street view facing west. And preliminary project details, as I noted, it is a mixed use project. The residential component has 207 units it's proposed to in 2 buildings, buildings A and building B, which altogether is a 204,640 square foot residential space. Building A is proposed to be 5 stories, 58 feet in height with 110 units. Building B is proposed to be 67.5 feet in height with 97 units. As part of the preliminary review, the applicant has indicated 21 units will be income restricted at the very low income classification. And there's also a commercial component on the ground floor that's approximately 9,500 square feet and separated into 4 separate tenant spaces. Both bicycle and vehicle parking have been provided. Currently, there are 221 bicycle parking spaces in the preliminary plans and 197 off-street parking spaces, which are both covered and uncovered. And this is a preliminary site plan included in the plan set that's posted to the city's website. This here is building A. This has the frontage that wraps around Adams and Clay and onto San Pablo Avenue. And this is building B, that will be the taller of the buildings and have the retail space that faces San Pablo Avenue. In terms of unit mix, the project will be comprised of studio 1 and 2 bedroom units. It's split across both buildings. This gives you the unit count. So in total, there would be 32 studio units, 100 one-bedroom units, and 75 two-bedroom units, which brings us to the total of 207 units. With respect to project entitlements, the request is subject to design review, and this includes the review of the proposed project architecture and site planning, and then density bonus. Density bonus is set through state law, and it allows a developer to build additional dwelling units and obtain flexibility in local development requirements in exchange for building affordable housing. So the design review purview, which is within the commission's capacity, is set in section 20100.050D1. This establishes the standards of review as well as general standards. And to give a snapshot of what that looks like, the commission will evaluate the project in the future based on general plan conformance, site planning, access, architecture, landscape design, coordination of design details, and privacy is also a consideration. So it takes a very specific focus at the overall project design. And this is a rendering of the project facing north. This is another rendering in the preliminary plan set, the view from Brighton towards facing west. Here's another view facing south. And then here's the view from Adams Street, which gives you a rendering of both buildings from that street elevation. With respect to density bonus, as I mentioned, it is prescribed in state law, and there are 2 words which are used throughout the staff report and will be used going forward. You'll see this quite often. So density bonus allows for concessions and waivers. So a concession is a reduction in site development standards or a modification of the zoning code or architectural design elements. Other regulatory incentives which can result in identifiable and actual cost reductions can also be considered a concession. So examples might include a reduced parking requirement or reduced setbacks. The number of concessions is determined by the affordability that's provided. So for this project, the very low units, 15 very low, even though there are 21 for this project, will allow for a total of 3 concessions that can be requested by the project sponsor. With respect to waivers, it's a little bit different. The city is not permitted to apply any development standard, which would physically preclude the construction of the project. The project sponsor may request that the city waive or reduce development standards that would otherwise prevent the density bonus project from being physically built. So this, in this case, an example would be the building height and the floor area ratio. And the distinction here is that the number of waivers that can be pursued is unlimited. So concessions, again, are restricted based on the amount of affordability that's included, whereas waivers are unlimited. And so with this particular project, the San Pablo Commercial Zoning District allows 63 units per acre as a density standard. So we take that and we make that the base project, which means the project under the current zoning could accommodate up to 138 units. The applicant has requested 50% density bonus to achieve the 207 unit count. In exchange, they are proposing the 21 units on site, which is 15% of the base project. And so this table, which is taken out of the staff report, gives you just a quick snapshot of the base units, the percentage of very low income units, the actual number, the bonus allowed, and then the project density. With respect to the waivers and concessions being requested, the waivers include an increase in the floor area ratio from 2.25 to 2.58. Also a building height increase from the 38 feet, which is currently in the zoning code, to 67.5 feet in height. And then daylight plane relief on the Adams Street elevations. With respect to concessions, they are seeking a reduction in the open space requirement, where 41,400 square feet would be required. And instead, they're going to proposing to provide just under 14,000 square feet. Additionally, there is a concession to waive planned unit development requirement that's contained in the municipal code as it relates to the overlay district of that planned residential commercial. As I've mentioned, this is subject to the inclusionary housing ordinance. This means that the developer is responsible for providing income restricted units. As I've mentioned, that will include 21 very low income units to satisfy the requirement. This is broken down right now into 3 studio units, 10 one-bedroom units, and 8 two-bedroom units. Generally, once we get further along in the process and take this to City Council, we do bring them an affordable housing agreement, which requires their review and action in a public hearing. And this is the point at which the developer will designate which units are going to be income restricted, and they provide that on supporting exhibits. Another question that had come up in the course of public correspondence is how the income and rents are determined. So this is a snapshot of tables taken directly from the Alameda County Housing website. This changes typically at the start of each fiscal year, so this is what's currently in place. To give you an idea, it's determined by the number of persons in the household and then a corresponding income. So a household of 1 earning $45,700 would be income qualified to occupy one of the affordable units. And you can see it goes so on down the line based on the number of persons in the household and the corresponding income. And below that, you have the table of what the corresponding rents are for studio 1 and 2 bedroom units as prescribed in that information. So you can see a studio would rent for just under $1,100, and then there's modest adjustments with each unit size. Another question that had come up in the course of correspondence is how the actual occupancy works. And so staff reached out to the project sponsor to better understand how they've administered this in other projects. And so they actually choose to manage it themselves and provide housing availability listings, which specify the income requirements. Applicants are then screened to make sure that they're income qualified, and those qualified candidates are run through a lottery using a randomizer computer program. So they do have a process that lists and properly screens, and then through random lottery provides an opportunity for those units to be occupied by those who are qualified. Moving on to another component of the preliminary plans, with respect to bicycle parking, there are 221 bicycle parking facilities that are proposed. 161 protected spaces within 2 rooms accessible from the parking garage are included, Building A. 48 protected spaces are proposed for Building B. There are also double stacked racks proposed, and there was an attachment to the report, a manufacturer's cut sheet, to give the commission a little bit more detail on that. And additionally, there will be outdoor bicycle racks along the San Pablo Avenue frontage. There are currently 4 existing, and 8 are proposed as part of this. And this table again gives you an indication of the requirements and what's being provided. So they're actually proposing to provide more than what is required. 213 bike parking spaces is the requirement, and they're providing 221. So it's 7 more than what would be required in the code. With respect to residential vehicle parking, the project is actually subject to ratios prescribed in density bonus law. The applicant is proposing at least 11% of very low income units. As I mentioned before, the site is also within a half a mile of the Plaza BART station. So as such, they are eligible for a 0.5 parking ratio. And here again is the table taken out of the staff report, and you can see that there are 104 off-street parking spaces that are required based on that required ratio. The applicant is providing 173 spaces, so that's 69 more off-street parking spaces than what is required. With respect to commercial parking, there is a new construction is granted a partial exemption of up to 2,000 square feet. So the applicant, while they're building 9,500 square feet, is actually only required to provide 7,500 square feet, parking for 7,500 square feet. We use the ratio of 1 per 400, which is consistent with retail uses. And so where 19 are required, they're providing 24 off-street parking spaces. One thing to note in your packet, you will have found an SB 330 supplemental application. And this is a separate application filing. And what this does, this is part of a state law that went into effect on January 1st, 2020. This does two things. It effectively locks in the project subject to the development standards from the date of filing. So this application was filed with the city on January 25th of this year. So it locks in the regulations that are on the books effective that date. This also limits the total number of public meetings to 5 once a formal application is filed. We expect that those meetings will largely be reviewed by the Planning Commission and the City Council. We are not in a position to bring this to other advisory bodies because we need to adhere to this 5-meeting restriction. And just so everyone is aware, this meeting tonight does not count towards the 5 meetings since this is a preliminary review. One other thing to note is that the project is also subject to the Housing Accountability Act, which is contained in section 65589.5 of the Government Code. This will have the effect of somewhat limiting the Commission and Council authority to substantially change the project scope as presented by the applicant. So effectively, the applicant can really specify the level of density parking for both bicycle and vehicle, as well as building height, and they can present that to you. The Commission is required to evaluate that application on its face. You can certainly, ask the developer for some consideration, but you cannot require substantial changes to the project. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Related to that, if the city were to deny the project or require a reduction in density or some substantial modification, there's additional findings that would have to be made and supported by a preponderance of evidence that clearly identifies adverse impacts. So there's another level of analysis and review that would have to be prepared prior to any action if there was a change that resulted in a reduction in the density. There has been extensive correspondence received. We had comments in your packet that went out on Friday, and of course, a lot of comments have been received over the weekend and through today. I wanted to take a moment to just answer and provide background information on a couple of those items that were identified in the correspondence. So we can just go through them point by point. One of the questions that was asked was requirement for a transportation demand management plan. A TDM plan is required when an applicant seeks a parking reduction through the conditional use permit process. However, this particular project as it's currently designed does not include that use permit request for parking reduction. Therefore, we cannot require it. If it were to be pursued, it would have to be a voluntary effort on the part of the project sponsor. It's not something that we can require as part of the project currently. There is an existing bus stop, as I mentioned, directly in front of the site. And a question had come up about requiring the developer to install bus stop facilities. Again, this is not something that we can condition as part of the project. However, if the project sponsor wanted to include bus stop facilities, they certainly could do so voluntarily as part of their project scope. With respect to the commercial tenants, obviously we don't know who those tenants will be. They have not yet been identified, but retail uses are permitted by right. And it's important to note that at this time, we cannot impose conditions or limitations on specific tenants regarding the future occupancy. So those are, limitations that we cannot impose upon the project sponsor. Another question had come up about condo conversion, which is not proposed as part of this scope. It is a fairly involved process. It's subject to the Subdivision Map Act. It is both a commission and a council review. It's also subject to a subdivision agreement, which specifies improvements related to the project. There's also filings that are made with the county and the state for recordation once the map is approved. But again, at this time, it's not part of this project scope. There were also some questions that were raised about conditioning future behavior of future occupants of this project. And I want to be clear that right now the commission's review is limited to the building and site design as well as the density bonus. So we are not in a position to impose conditions related to the behavior of future occupants. We're looking strictly at the application based on the architecture, design, and the density bonus. For those who wish to stay involved, we have created an e-notification, which you can go to the e-notification function of the city's website, and under news, you will see a checkbox for 540 San Pablo Avenue. So if you wish to receive future notices about this project, please go there and you will receive those updates via email. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15332 infill development. Staff has worked with the city attorney as well as a CEQA consultant on the preparation of supporting analysis that will be prepared as part of this review. There is case law as well as a provision in density bonus law that we're evaluating that. We're confident with the determination that's been made. But again, we have our CEQA attorney involved in this. So this is being reviewed with that lens in mind. We do have some more specific questions that we will get into later when the commission has a more extensive discussion. At this time, I'm going to stop my screen share and I am going to promote our transportation planner to a panelist, and he will provide you with a presentation on the transportation questions that have been asked.
Good evening, commissioners. Sorry, it's always a little harrowing as everything gets turned off before I rejoin as a panelist. Bear with me. So I am going to briefly walk through the relevant city plans and external agency plans associated with the site and the adjacent streets. Regarding the site itself, the Albany Active Transportation Plan identifies a connection through the subject site between Clay and San Pablo at Brighton in both the proposed bicycle and pedestrian networks. On San Pablo Avenue, it is, of course, a major arterial carrying upwards of 26,000 vehicles on an average weekday. It is served by a number of AC transit routes carrying over 500 passengers on an average weekday peak period through Albany. There are existing stops, as was mentioned, at Brighton for several routes, the 72, 72M, and 800. And nearby on Carlson are stops that serve the 72 Rapid Bus. There is an upcoming AC Transit Rapid Corridors project that will be adding signal priority technology to the signals along San Pablo Avenue, and that's intended to speed the bus service along the route and improve service reliability. Alameda County Transportation Commission is also leading a San Pablo corridor study, which many of you are aware of, that'll be looking at long-term corridor changes, including potential dedicated transit lanes and bicycle facilities on San Pablo or parallel routes. It's also important to note that San Pablo Avenue is a state highway, and it's maintained and operated by Caltrans, not the city of Albany. Albany did complete a complete street study for San Pablo and Buchanan, which led to designs of a capital improvement project focused on safety improvements for San Pablo Avenue crossings. And this includes pedestrian safety improvements planned for the crossings at both Clay and Brighton. And one change associated with that is the shift of the existing crosswalk crossing San Pablo from the south side of Brighton to the north side adjacent to the site. On Adams Street, which is a local street parallel to San Pablo, it is a two-way dead-end street north of Clay and one-way street northbound south of Clay. The active transportation plan identifies Adams Street for a two-way bicycling route as an alternative to San Pablo Avenue. The city went through a range of options studying for bicycle facilities on Adams Street and has developed a capital improvement project for a pilot two-way bikeway that maintains one-way through travel for motor vehicles with concrete barriers at the southbound approach to each block. The bridge across Cerrito Creek envisioned in the active transportation plan to connect Adams Street to Carlson Boulevard in El Cerrito remains at the conceptual stage. Additional alternatives and feasibility analysis are next steps for this project. But I'll note there are a number of significant hurdles. There's state ownership involved. There's ecological and utility issues, as well as crossing multiple jurisdictions. In the interim, connecting across to Brighton is the route cyclists continuing north from Adams will have to stay off of San Pablo. That concludes my presentation and available for questions. Hand it back over to you, Anne.
Do any commissioners have any questions for Justin?
Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, I was just wondering, we don't really know what the change in traffic intensity will be going out the curb cut at Brighton, but I was just wondering about the potential effect on bus rapid transit lanes. We don't know if the bus rapid transit lane would be in the second lane or the first lane. I'm just wondering what kind of anticipated increase in intensity there might be at the exit entrance of this project versus what there is now. It is signal controlled, which is helpful, but just wondering if you had any ideas what the impact on bus rapid transit lanes might be, or bus service in general, or so that would be the first basic question.
The installation of signal prioritization that AC Transit is putting in, it is a signalized intersection, so that will be an improvement to the service that'll help the buses get through the signals quicker. With regards to the long range look that ACTC is doing, again, you mentioned there are various alternatives they're evaluating. It is at a signalized intersection, so if the main access for the site is at the signal, I wouldn't foresee a huge conflict with the traffic coming in and out, but it is to be determined exactly what what alternative that will move forward.
Are there any other questions for Justin? No? Okay. With that, then why don't we continue on with the presentation of the project sponsor?
Okay, I have just promoted the project sponsor to a panelist, and I will go ahead and share my screen again with their presentation. I think Isaiah is there.
Yeah, good evening. Can you all hear me? Yeah, nice to be here with you tonight to look at our project at 540 San Pablo Avenue. I'm Isaiah Stackhouse with Trachtenberg Architects, and we have David Trachtenberg as well, and project sponsors Morgan Reed and Casey Stevens. Next slide. So the site it's a great site on the active San Pablo corridor near groceries, services, and as Ann mentioned, less than half a mile over to El Cerrito Art Plaza. Next slide. Some context views here, all pretty familiar, so I won't go through them one by one. Next view. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, there's currently an easement that runs from the Sutter parking lot through the site and out to the intersection at Brighton, where there's a stoplight there, and that allows those folks to make a left-hand turn onto San Pablo Avenue or continue on to Brighton. So that current easement running through the middle of the site would be quite difficult to make work with a project, but again, it is relocatable. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing is to move that easement west, sort of up on the page here. Sutter cars will still be able to drive through the site and out to San Pablo. And interestingly, it has some benefits for the project as well, in that it sort of naturally breaks down the massing of the project into two separate buildings, breaking down the scale of the project. To the left is what we're calling Building A, that's 5 stories. And to the right, the building that's sort of naturally set back from the Adams, from the residential street, set back 81 feet, and front San Pablo. We made that a story taller at 6 stories. Next slide, please. So here's the ground level site plan. So the site plan, it allows for just a single driveway out onto San Pablo. So no longer any driveways onto Clay or Adams. We're proposing 9,500 square feet of retail all along San Pablo in both buildings. Retail is very important to the project sponsor. They have deep history with retail, and they see the retail here as very important to the success of the project and beneficial for the project and the community. So along with that, this relocatable easement also creates sort of ample visible outdoor parking to support good retail and to be able to write into potential leases for retail. We see that as an important project, important part of the project to really support good retail and attract good retail. As mentioned, we're proposing 221 bikes, including 17 longer cargo bikes shared between rooms within the 2 buildings. Our other recent projects with the project sponsors have been able to include EV charging stations, and we've been in discussions for a potential electric car share program as well for this project. The project includes shared amenity spaces and lobbies between the 2 buildings at multiple levels. On the ground level, there's a shared fitness center and leasing office between the 2 buildings. We're also proposing a widened sidewalk on Clay proposing to maintain the full required setback on Adams. And then actually on Adams with a taller building B, setback a full 81 feet from Adams. Next slide, please. So here's a detail of Clay, where currently the sidewalk is only 5 feet wide and the current building is right on the property line there. So instead of repeating that condition, we're proposing to voluntarily hold the building back 8 feet on Clay there to create a generous 13-foot sidewalk that has ample room for true trees and tree wells, generous walking path, and landscaping there. Next slide. So going up to the podium level, we're proposing podium gardens at both buildings, and in addition to that, amenity rooms that are adjacent to each of those gardens. Along San Pablo, there are some small private patios, and then on building A, along Adams, there are some porches and stoops with stairs out to the sidewalk on Adams. Next slide. Moving up to the 6th floor, building B has an additional roof deck near the entry court and an adjacent community room there as well. And then building A, as mentioned, is held to 5 stories. Now, in terms of scale of the project, as mentioned, is utilizing the full density bonus density of 207 units. However, if you look at the allowable FAR, a 50% bonus would take that up to 3.375. Instead, the project is proposed 24% below that at 2.58. And then correlating with that, the gross floor area, 50% bonus, density bonus would allow 321,000 square feet. Again, the project is proposed to be 24% below the allowable. So what this really means is that these 207 units could all be made larger, and with the filling out 6 stories on both buildings. But we feel that the unit sizes are appropriate and that they're in the right balance for the site and for the unit mix and the unit types. Next slide. So looking at that in more detail, proposing 36% 2-bedroom units that are around 1,000 square feet, 48% 1-bedrooms at around 700 square feet, and 16% studios at 500 square feet. Next slide. So here are elevations. We're showing 2 buildings, again, different heights, and active retail and lobbies along the San Pablo frontage. Next slide. Here are details of the 2 buildings. You'll see there's sort of separate but complementary palettes proposed, and distinct massing and articulation complementary between the 2 buildings. Next slide. Elevations on Clay and Adams, and note on Adams and Clay, but Adams especially, there is quite a bit of grade change. If you look at the far right, building A, it really scales down to about 4.5 stories there. In the far left, building B, where it's 6 stories, is again, that's set back 81 feet from Adams with a good landscape buffer. Next slide. Here are building sections. So the shorter building A up at the top is set back 16'9" from Adams. This exceeds the 15-foot requirement. And then at the bottom of the page, building B, which is 6 stories, is again set back very far. It's sort of a natural condition created by that drive-through easement. Next slide. And just to go over one detail of one of the waivers that is being requested, all along the full length of Adams, there is a daylight plane which if you go back the 15 feet into the site and then up 28 feet, and then the daylight plane starts at a 45-degree angle. So you can see at the top left there that the top floor density bonus units do require a waiver there to be physically constructed there. But if you look at the site plan and the diagram in the upper right, what we've tried to do, there's more than half of the site actually has either no building along Adams or has a very, very large setback. So more than half of the site is not affected at all by the Adams daylight plane. Okay, next slide. Here's a view looking north along San Pablo. You can see the fabric of new retail along San Pablo. Again, we're proposing richly articulated buildings, bay windows. Next slide. Here's a closer view further north along San Pablo near the entry court, showing both buildings. Next slide. Here's a view from Brighton. You can see really there's quite a large separation between these two buildings. That's just sort of a natural benefit of that easement pass through there. Next slide. Here's a view looking north along San Pablo. To the right is the Sutter building, the Sutter parking, and then in the foreground there you're seeing the new fabric of retail. Next slide. Here's a view from Clay and Adams, where the building scales down as the site rises up. It scales down to about 4.5 stories. You can see the full 15-foot setback on Adams. And again, you're seeing the voluntary 8-foot setback on Clay to create a very nice pedestrian sidewalk environment. Next slide. So thank you. That concludes our presentation, and we look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you. With that, we will go ahead and turn it to the commission to see if folks have any questions for either staff at this time or for the project sponsor. Okay, Commissioner Momin, why don't you go ahead and start things off?
Yeah, thank you for a great presentation, Isaiah Stackhouse. It is a nice design. I really like a lot of things about that, but I would start with a question to the city staff. I want to know, as part of the density bonus program, I understand that the project has proposed 15% of very low income housing units in exchange for the density bonus. I want to know if city can decide what kind of affordable housing it would prefer in return of this concession, whether it would be all very low income or it could be a combination of very low income and low income. The reason I'm asking is that because as part of the RENA obligation, we need 15% of very low income and 25% of low income units, and it is a very big challenge for us to cater for that in our next housing element cycle. And this is likely to be the largest project Albany would have in the next 10 years maybe. And so it would be good if we can get as many affordable housing units as possible through this project. And so I'm wondering if we can, instead of just getting 15% of very low income housing units that would get us 21 very low income housing units, can we ask for a combination of, let's say, 10% of very low income with 2 concessions and 10% density bonus, and 10% of low income with 1 concession and 20% density bonus? That would give us 28 affordable housing units in 2 categories.
So I'll try and take this sort of question by question and just give a base answer, which is that as long as the developer provides the 15% inclusionary requirement, we are not in a position to ask for additional commitment beyond that. That is what's prescribed in the code, and so that is what the developer is required to provide. Generally, our code actually requires a mix of the low and very low. In this case, though, they're voluntarily providing the VLI income restriction, which is generally a little bit harder to get than a low income restriction. And again, this is something that they have included in this preliminary review, and I'm not sure that we're actually in a position to modify what type of income status, particularly if they're providing a percentage greater than what would be required. So because we're getting more VLI, I don't know that we can actually ask for a mix of the two. It's something I could defer to our city attorney and ask, at a later point in time. But I'm pretty sure what they've presented, this 15% at the VLI, is what we have to take on its face.
Thank you.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, and I have a question for Ann as well. And I want to thank everyone for their presentations, and Isaiah and Justin as well. Anyway, my question really is, I want to verify my belief here. I think that we can kind of say this project, as it's been presented to us, is pretty much vested. Is that under the SB 330? Is that right? I mean, we don't have the ability to do much in terms of in way of making any major changes to design. Am I generally correct in that?
I believe you still have discretion, over the architecture and site planning, but with regards to the specifics in terms of building height, density, those really are at the developer's discretion as far as what they incorporate into their project.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? If not, okay, Commissioner Pilch.
Yeah, I have quite a few questions, but the first thing I would say is that I want to understand, I think what Planning Director Hirsch was saying about the suggesting change or asking for changes. My assumption is that we can suggest any changes we want, and that although we know that we can't change the project, we can't ask for, it would be futile to ask for changes that change the project in a substantial way. I think that a suggestion such as Commissioner Momin's, that the applicant consider, this is not his suggestion, but the applicant consider low income instead of very low income is perfectly all right for us to suggest. Would that be correct?
I think you can suggest it, but with the caveat again that as long as they're meeting the inclusionary, and if they're electing to go to a greater income restriction, they're within their rights to do that.
And I'd also note that this is not the formal application. We're in the preliminary application phase, and so this gives us more latitude for suggestions since things actually have not been formally locked in because a formal application has not been presented. That's correct? Okay.
Right. Tonight is really an opportunity for the commission as well as members of the public to ask questions and provide feedback so that these plans can be refined and a formal application submittal would be filed with the city at a future date.
Okay. So I have quite a few questions, but given that it looks like I'm the only planning commissioner who has like about 8 questions of the applicant, I wonder if the chair would prefer to go to public comment first, or should I do those now?
I definitely have a handful of questions myself, and it looked like Commissioner McLeod did as well. So why don't you go ahead and go through your questions, and we'll just keep it going.
Okay, I'll try to do them as quickly as possible. To the project applicant, why did you not consider reducing the parking to the minimum required?
There are really 2 reasons for that. One is that the parking, the total parking includes both the residential and the retail. And, you know, with the reduced rates allowable by the city, it equates to about 2 spaces per 1,000 for the retail. And we think that's a good policy. It's good to have that flexibility. But the project sponsors have a great deal of experience with retail, and there are some retail uses that to attract them, you really need to provide quite a bit more retail parking, as much as 4 or even 6 per 1,000. So having more of that outdoor parking is very beneficial there. And then also it allows some flexibility between the 2 uses. And then for the residential as well, you know, there are quite a few 2-bedroom units that could definitely have families. So it's still parked at a residential ratio below 1. And we feel it's about the right balance. Now, the garages do include some parking stacker machines. If at a later date, the parking demand turned out to not need that for residential leasing or commercial leasing, those machines could be pulled out or not installed in the first place. But basically, it's sort of between those 2 uses. We certainly recognize that we could, voluntarily reduce those ratios, but we feel that being able to offer good parking to commercial tenants is very important at the site. That's a primary reason.
Well, thank you. Have you considered unbundling the parking for the residential?
Yeah, it would be unbundled. It would be leased separately from the units.
Oh, okay, great. I missed that. Thank you. And we've had some comments about having 3-bedroom units as well as the studio 1 and 2-bedroom. Have you considered that?
We considered it a little bit, but it just wasn't quite in the just not quite in the mix that this project sponsor is used to and has worked well in the past.
Okay. Are you considering having an all-electric? Are you considering having all-electric buildings?
We are definitely going to have all-electric appliances in the units. And we're exploring all electric for building systems, but that's a little soon to know for sure. That's sort of very, very new latest tech. And then we're unsure still too with potentially having restaurant tenants if those might need some gas to make work. So those are, but we're definitely committed to all electric appliances in all the units. There will be EV stations. We're looking at the EV car share, and we'll see down the road when we get into later stages if we can truly go all electric.
Okay. What percentage of parking spaces are you considering to have EV charging?
Don't know yet. That will get determined a little further down the road.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then in front of on San Pablo, at the curb of San Pablo, are you taking into account, are you counting in your potential parking, motor vehicle parking spaces, the cars that might park at the curb, or are you leaving that flexible such that there might be other uses at the curb there?
Yeah, so the parking specified in the application is solely on the property itself, off-street. So no on-street parking spaces are included, given that we don't have control over those, and they may become a bike lane someday. You never know, so you can't really count.
Okay.
Might be more bus stops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Only 2 more questions left. So one building is 5 stories, one building is 6 stories. Is that deliberate because the 5-story building is closer to the most of the residential?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons for that. One is that that the 6-story building does have a very large 81-foot setback. So that was the sort of natural choice between the two. Some of it just really derives from taking 207 units at the unit mix that the project sponsors think would work very well at the site, and seeing how much floor area that takes and how much mass it takes. And then we'd mentioned too that, for instance, just economically, we would never propose, 7 stories and 3. That really, with this type of development and construction costs, that 5 and 6 stories is really a natural efficiency point, because you can build up to 5 stories of wood over a 1-story concrete podium. As soon as you go above 6 stories, buildings start getting very expensive very fast. And so, we did consider the idea of having bigger units and filling up the 6 floors on both sites, but on the other hand, we're just raising construction costs by doing that as well. And so it's really trying to find that balance of units that are big enough to be extremely livable and to really provide what people want while not overbuilding.
Okay, thank you. And last question. I understand that we are in the process of doing something called the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, but you are not waiting for that process to complete. Can you speak to that at all? Are you just ready to go right now, or you didn't think that it was going to factor into your project?
Yeah, we are aware that it's going on. Those types of things can have sort of uncertain timelines and uncertain outcomes. And, the project sponsors, the project can't necessarily support the carrying costs until all of that resolves, and not knowing how that resolves. And, the density bonus and SB 330, sort of allow you to work with what we have today on the books, and it, we think that it works well, and again, there's extra square footage we could have tried to build here. I don't think we, even if allowed 7 or 8 stories for this particular project, we don't think that would have been economically feasible at this site for this project of this project type. Just because you start introducing more floors of concrete residential units that get very expensive and very inefficient. So we're the current the current zoning we think works very well for this project. It's a very good fit for this project.
Okay.
But certainly just leave it at that, I guess.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm done for now. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner McLeod, did you have questions?
Yeah, I have a few. Actually, Commissioner Pilch asked many of mine already. I wanted to touch again on the idea of a transportation demand management plan. And I was wondering if the applicant has done those on other projects, and if you would be willing to do one here. I think it would be beneficial for everyone to understand the impacts of parking and the opportunities for, ride sharing, car sharing, other options. So have you done that on other projects? I know you've done a lot of projects around Berkeley.
Yeah.
That would be something you'd be willing to do here.
It's, I think that's something that our group needs to talk about more. It's something we normally talk about a little further down the line. So it's not something that we've talked about in any kind of detail yet. But we'll note that as a question going forward.
Okay, yeah, I think one of the major neighborhood concerns, of course, is spillover parking and that sort of thing. So anything that can be done to help answer those kind of concerns would be really helpful. Along the same lines, have you ever worked with Transform on a Green Trip certified process, Green Trip certification to also kind of identify opportunities for alternative modes of transportation?
No, we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, they have a program. You could look at their website, and they've worked with a lot of developers to, help work out the micro mobility plans, et cetera. Let's see, the other questions. Did you try to negotiate the easement or getting rid of the easement? That's what I understood from Anne, but I just wanted you to.
Yeah, there were, a lot of conversations with Sutter, and that didn't really go anywhere. The easement, thankfully, was written in a way that it's easily movable, and overall, we think that it turns out to not actually be an impediment to the project, that it has, some unintended good effects, like creating the separation between the two buildings, breaking down the scale, sort of naturally creating the setback to one of the buildings. So it was talked about, but it didn't go anywhere, and there's sort of no leverage either. And we certainly understand the neighbor's point of view too, that making a left, across all those lanes out of their own parking lot is certainly less than ideal, and being able to drive over to the mid-block light is helpful to them. We certainly see that point of view.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't see that it would have been a big problem for them to just turn right onto San Pablo automatically instead of left. I mean, as many parking lots do, they only turn into the flow of traffic. But anyway, they will not change, then no point in really discussing that too much more. I had a couple other questions. One is, I think, and maybe Ann can confirm, we have new EV charging requirements. It's 20% EV charging stations installed, and then everything else EV ready. Is that correct, Ann?
I would have to double check with other staff in the department, but that sounds on par.
Yeah, we upgraded our CalGreen requirements, I think, to include that. So I was just wondering, how do those parking lifts work with EV charging? I mean, is that something that's feasible and can be done?
It is feasible, and it's quite common, thankfully. So the various manufacturers have figured out how to do that, thankfully.
Okay, great. Yeah, because that will have to be at least EV ready, so that in 10, 15 years, when perhaps we have mostly EV cars, and it'll be easy to switch over. My last question, well, I was also wondering about 3-bedroom units, how it would be helpful to have that in the mix. But I guess my last question was about 5 and 6 stories. You have 6 stories on one building, building B, and on building A, it's a uniform 5 stories front and back. And I was wondering if you've considered doing 6 stories on the San Pablo side and reducing it by 1 story on the Adams side to help the transition from the front to the back into the residential neighborhood. I personally would prefer a uniform 6 stories along San Pablo. So I was just wondering what your thinking is there, and what we can do about that.
We did look at that a bit. It gets tricky to have stepping in the building with the shape of the building, and to get the stairways to work. So you end up with additional stairs. And then part of it too is that there is quite a bit of cross slope as well on San Pablo, though it feels flat when you're out there, at least to me. But there is actually some grade change, and so that sort of naturally evens out the two buildings a little more. But so those were the main reasons. We did look at it a bit, but it's for building efficiencies. And there is actually some significant cost savings in keeping that one building 5 floors rather than a mix of 4 and 6, because the 5 floors can be built in type 5, which is unrated construction, versus once you go to 6 stories, it goes to type 3A, where the entire perimeter of the building, well, it's still built in wood, is all built in fire retardant lumber, and it does raise the cost. So so the building B at 6 stories is more expensive to build than building A, and building A would become more expensive were it split, like say 6 stories and 4.
Okay. Well, I probably will have more questions, but I'll be happy to let other commissioners ask now. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm happy to jump in with a couple remaining questions. Fortunately, many of my questions were asked by my fellow commissioners, but I did have a few remaining, both of staff and for the project applicant. While we have the applicant on the line, maybe I will turn to you. So along sort of similar questioning that Commissioner McLeod just had regarding the changing in the building height, just wondering if you could talk a little bit also about the choice to have a surface parking lot for the one portion fronting Adams versus stepping some of the massing, maybe building up to a 3-story volume there, but being able to, either offload the 5 stories at the other portion of Adams, but, is there a way that the volume can be a little equalized along Adams to maybe hold at 3 stories across and still keep the same massing, but reduce the apparent height along Adams without popping you into a different construction typology? So I heard your answers on the sort of stairwell costs and the step-in costs and all of that, but I'm just wondering if there's any other answer to the rationale for retaining a surface parking lot for that. I guess it would be the northern portion along Adams.
Yeah, I mean, one thing there is that the parking that is being provided out along that easement path is essentially being provided for only the cost of the landscaping. It's virtually free, versus were we to move that same parking and take it inside to being closed parking, that tends to be on the order of $50,000 per space. So moving that outdoor parking indoors is an extremely expensive endeavor. And then also, in order to keep that easement, 20 to 24 foot wide easement, unless we were to encroach directly up to Adams without any kind of setback, then there's not really room for another building along Adams there. And then also, we would wonder about the field. Were that to be only a driveway, if that would be pretty mean feeling, to be a drive only. To us, it feels better as a sort of a parking port than sort of a drive with nothing associated with it. If that makes sense. But I think that primarily it's that it's a fit thing, that there's, with that easement there's not really room for a building on either side of a driveway there, and really not much room for a building at all unless we were to encroach into that setback.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. The one remaining question that I had for you, and I'm not sure it's for you or for somebody else on the team, but just given the numerous public comments that we've received so far about everyone's love for the beloved Albany Bowl, I was just hoping, for the sake of sort of putting it on the record, if you could share for the public sort of the fate of the Albany Bowl, why it's closing, why it's not sticking around, and why you are in the position, or your clients are in the position of now moving forward for a condo project. But I just want to make it sort sort of get the facts out there, because I know there's been a lot of chatter within the community about what exactly has gone on with the closure of the Albany Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, and is that directed to us as the applicant?
Yeah, somebody on your team. I'm not expecting architects to necessarily know the answer, but if there's somebody that you guys have on the line who might be able to answer that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, you know, our team wasn't a part of that decision, you know, to close the bowl. I think, you know, that the East Bay Times article, there was an article that ran in December that interviewed the owner. I think he probably said it there as well as he could say it to everybody, that it, you know, he said it came down to money and taxes, and he'd spent $700,000 in out-of-pocket expenses trying to keep it afloat, and couldn't keep it open anymore. And you know, so that's, you know, that's sort of what he's told to us as well. And I think that you know, that it was a good fit with the, you know, in terms of figuring out the next best use for it. That the fit with the project sponsors was good. They had a good relationship. He is very positive about the new scheme, and is happy the way with how it turned out, and you know, thinks it's, you know, was happy with the decision to work with this particular project sponsor based on the scheme and what they wanted to do with it moving into the future.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And then my one remaining question is actually for planning staff here. Switching gears a little bit from the previous questions, but as it relates to the affordable housing units, are there any requirements when we do get to the point of bringing forward the affordable housing agreement to the city council? Are there any requirements that are already in the code about distributing the units throughout the building, or, you know, not stacking them all on the ground floor, or, you know, putting them in one corner of the building? If you could just talk a little bit about what regulations or regulatory authority we have as it relates to that.
Yeah, it does get dispersed throughout the project. We do leave it up to the applicant in terms of the units that they designate, but that again is subject to action by the city council. So there is some discretion if there was some issue wanting to see one unit designated over another. But yeah, it is that distribution of units is over the entire project. It's not concentrated in one particular corner of either building A or building B in this case.
Great. So staff has discretion to receive the proposal of distribution and ask for changes. That's all within their discretionary authority, yeah. Or ultimately the city council, but
ultimately the city council. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. That concludes all of my questions. Do any of the other commissioners have any comments before we open it up for public comment? Oh, Commissioner Momin.
Yeah, I would also like to touch upon the issue of surface parking you mentioned. You know, I had saved that for my comments later, but it would be good to discuss that now. You know, I also think that perpetuating that surface parking along Adams Street is not really desirable. Even if it is landscape, it would still be a big hole along the street. And, you know, the city code requires a 6 feet opaque fencing along surface parking lots. And so that's what, you know, that street edge would get. So I totally understand, you know, very creative use of relocated easement and the benefits that it has in terms of, setbacking the taller building away from the Adams Street neighborhood. But I think it would still be interesting to look at possibility of having some active frontage along that face of that side of the Adams Street, you know. And some people have, you know, suggested having some 3-bedroom units. I would really be interested in seeing if there is any possibility of, you know, row houses along that side, and there could be some creative, you know, design that could use the space under the townhouses for parking. And I really like some parking on grade for retail, making it attractive to retail, but that could be somehow combined with some structure along Adams Street. And if we want to relocate some of the parking, we could add some stackers in the building B garage. But I think I would really be interested in seeing some building street wall along that face.
Okay, appreciate that comment. We'll look at it.
Thank you.
And Commissioner McLeod, did you have one more comment?
Yeah, just
question?
well, actually, maybe a couple things, but I just wanted to ask the applicant to discuss the waiver for open space. What your thinking is. I look at the site plan and I see a lot of ground space that is being covered by parking that is not required, and yet you're requesting a waiver of open space requirements. Open space doesn't necessarily have to be roof deck. So could you talk us through your thinking there and why it's how do you justify that waiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easement's a big part of that, running through there. Certainly we looked at additional roof decks, but they do get expensive, especially to make them real large roof decks to make a big impact on the total square footage. Once they get over a certain size, they become A occupancies, and you start to have to upgrade the whole building to type 1. So there's sort of a limit to how big even roof decks at the very top can get. So the current design, does include the 2 podiums with rooms adjacent to it, an additional roof deck up at level 6. There are some opportunities for private patios here and there, but the parking, it's in a way you can call it extra, but in a way it's not really extra. Just for perspective, it's parked way less than Albany code requires. It's parked slightly higher than the minimum density bonus requirements that can be put upon a project, but it's still parked at well below 1 per 1. And again, with these mixed use type projects, I think these types of projects would really benefit from cars going away at some time in the future, and the project sponsors would welcome that day when it gets here, because parking is a huge part of the expense and the sort of practicalities of being able to get a project to work here that's financially feasible. So, so taking all that parking and moving it into parking stackers takes a spot that doesn't cost much there and turns it into a $50,000 spot, plus the parking machine for another $20,000 turns it into a $70,000 spot. So it starts to add up a lot to move all that parking indoors.
Well, I guess I wasn't suggesting moving it all indoors, but removing some of it is an option. Just to be clear, the parking requirement is 0.5 spaces per unit, given its proximity to within a half mile of a major transit station. So 0.5 is your legal requirement.
Yeah, under the density bonus code, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, well, anyway, I'll leave that for now.
But, but ultimately too, the units need to be leased, they need to be attractive to tenants, and, there's, people can have different opinions about how much parking, a project needs, but it's important on the leasing side as well. to provide that parking.
Okay. Okay. My last question, and it doesn't show on your site plan, but will there be a bike and pedestrian access to Adams Street? Because that's going to become a bike boulevard, two-way bike boulevard, potentially a link to El Cerrito. So I don't see that on your site plan, but
we've just started talking about that, and we are planning to set up a meeting with Ann and the transportation planner to look at that. So it's not something that's been studied yet, but it's our intention to make that happen for sure.
Yeah, and I just to comment further. Yeah, I did reach out to the project sponsor, and so this is on the radar. This is something that we're going to look at in greater detail, and hopefully have a little more detail to share with the commission once a formal application is filed.
Yeah, and if I could just go back to Justin, he mentioned a bicycle link through the parking lot as part of our active transportation plan. Is that being abandoned? What's that status? Is that no longer feasible because of the new development, or what is its status? Maybe Justin could answer that, or Ann, you could answer that, or the applicant.
Sorry, you're asking the status of?
You said there was going to be a bicycle pedestrian link from Adams through the parking lot. This was, I guess, when it was still the Berkeley Bowl site. And that was, you said, part of the active transportation plan?
It was identified as a desired link in the network. Yeah, it was on private property then. It's currently private property. It's not something this city can do.
Nothing we can require, but it is something to discuss. Is that my understanding? Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Commissioner McLeod. Any remaining questions from commissioners before we open it up for public comment? Okay, great. With that then, Chris, if you can, so now is the time for everyone who is listening to this hearing to go ahead and raise your hand for public comment. Chris, how many folks do we right now have in the queue for public comment?
So we have 24 attendees, and at the moment we have 6 hands raised. Okay.
So given the number of folks here, we'll still go ahead and stick with our 3 minutes per member of the public for public speaking. We will go ahead and kick that off now. And again, for members of the public, now is your time to join the queue if you'd like to speak. Thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm. First speaker, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
All right, thank you. So, I learned a lot about Albany and parking requirements. At least I think I learned something. There was a residential apartment went up and there was no parking available for that unit. I mean, there were 20, 30 apartment, residentials in the apartment complex. They didn't have to provide one parking space. I mean, the total amount of parking spaces they provided was 0. Not even an ADA, not even a handicap parking space. And it was passed by Albany, it was approved. 0 parking spaces. Wow. So it could be done, obviously. I was totally against it. I was like, hey, people need parking. And obviously I learned something new. Parking isn't even required. It's that song, price to put up a parking lot, right? What's the price to put up a parking lot? Millions of dollars, or people that can't have housing, homelessness. The price of a parking lot is homelessness, so if I don't know what to say. I mean, I obviously speaking up for parking doesn't work. So might as well speak up for more housing. It looks like you could fit a couple more units in there. It looks like almost 70 more units could go in there, right? I don't know if I'm wrong, but I don't know what to say. Just, hey, put more people in there, build more units. I mean, you still got to have room for extra fire hydrants, sort of thing. And I don't know about having bicycle parking on San Pablo. that's just going to attract people to steal bicycles, and it's just going to attract, you might want to have the bicycle parking in the back, hidden somewhere, secured, not advertising, hey, there's all these bikes here, come. You don't want people just getting off the BART station and trying to steal bicycles. We don't want to encourage that kind of behavior. We just keep our bicycles in the back, secured somewhere close to the bike lane, right? That you're just talking about, somewhere close to the bike lane on Adams. So put the bike racks close to the bike lane. Yeah, I saw a lot of parking spaces there. So obviously, if you could fit some more units, that'd be great. 200 units. And is this condos? I heard the word condos. Is this like a Pier Street or something, condos? So you could buy individual units, or I'm not sure what's going on here. Are these condos? I mean, $1 million each. You got 200 of them. That's $200 million. I'm talking about a lot of money here. I don't know if it's condos. Maybe I misheard something. We got a couple $100 million. This is a big project. So, let's get more housing, I guess, take away some parking spaces, that's all I could say. More houses, less parking spaces.
Time's up. Next speaker is Peter Moss. Peter, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to add my voice in support of this project. I think it's very impressive. It's the right number and the right mix of inclusionary and market rate residences for Albany. And it's in the perfect location on a bus transit line and a stone's throw away from a BART station. It's also, in my opinion, a lovely modern design that will set a high bar for future development along the San Pablo corridor. I know the bowling alley will be missed, and it was a great place for family fun, but no one should expect the owners to continue losing money in order to keep it open. And 207 new units will be a major step forward in addressing Albany's housing needs. Given the proximity to transit, it's not underparked. But I understand some of the neighbors' hesitation about this, and I'm hoping that the city will step up at this point and develop an equitable and financially solvent neighborhood parking permit plan that could help mitigate some of these concerns. I'm happy to hear that the EV stations are part of the design, and I hope that bikes will also be able to get stations. I hope that the developers can go beyond whatever requirements that may currently be in place and prepare all the parking spaces for the future. I'll stop at this point. I have plenty of other ideas, but I look forward to hearing more details as the process proceeds. And I hope that the entitlement process does go smoothly and that shovels are in the ground as soon as possible. Thanks.
Great. Next speaker up is Margie Marks. Margie, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you. I have a question, and maybe you explained this and I missed it, and I apologize if you did. But I look at the housing element. It says if there are 7 units or more, 15% need to be below market rate. So if it's 207 units, that's at least 30 below market rate units. Now, I looked at the documents online, and it talks about there's only 138 what they call base units, and that's what they base the 15% on. So my question is, why aren't they basing the 15% of below market units on the 207 units? What's the difference in the 138 base units as opposed to the 207 units? My second question, and maybe this is very simplistic, and it's very, you guys understand it and I don't, but I hear you talking about giving the developer density bonus, waivers, exchanges in exchange for doing these affordable units. The law is that they have to do 15% affordable units. I don't know. And so if we're giving them waivers, to me, that seems like we should be able to get more affordable units out of them for the waivers or the bonuses or whatever they're asking. the 15% is just merely following the law as it's written in Albany. Thank you. And like I said, maybe I don't understand this whole process. Hopefully one of you could explain it to me. Thank you.
Great. Next speaker is Al. Al, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. One is, how long will the affordability component be in place? Is it in perpetuity? Where does that go in the, does the city council decide? So that's one question I have. Another is, I just wanted to mention that it would be great if the city would do more extensive outreach on projects like this, because it's so big and has an impact on such a large number of residents in the city. So I'd like to see more extensive outreach before any of these meetings take place. Also, if Anne could revisit, since there's been so much information presented, it would be great to hear again what actually is discretionary with this project. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Gurji. Gurji, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this project. We are in dire need of more housing, and I'm glad that Albany will be doing its part. My main comments are, related again to parking, as other members of the community mentioned. I think this allocating so much parking for these units, I think we can do something and reduce this. Actually, the location is in a very attractive place. It's so close to mass public transportation stations and groceries and great amenities around. So the fact that some people might not find this attractive place to live in because they don't have sufficient parking, I think that might not be as much the case. I mean, people are really looking for housing. They're not really looking as much to where they're going to park a vehicle, specifically in our location. And the way things are going, car ownership is actually being reduced generation by generation. So that's something that we need to consider, moving into the future. On the other hand, micromobility is evolving, and from what we see in Europe and other parts of the world, that's kind of exploding right now. So if we replace some of this parking with more bike storage, like accommodating e-bikes, do we have charger stations for e-bikes? Can people plug in their e-bikes when they park them? That's something that would be very useful. Allocating more space for micromobility, shared micromobility, where people can, safely park a bike so that it's not on the sidewalk, or a shared bike, or a shared scooters, or things, that type of transportation. I mean, we can use some of that parking also to accommodate things like, more shared spaces. I mean, we're removing a bowling alley. You can even have a small bowling alley to replace with some of from the parking, and then we can continue some of that amenity that some of the people will be missing here. What else I had here in mind? Yeah, I mean, overall, I really like this idea. I'm very excited about this. We need more housing. Let's make it, let's make it possible. More housing, less parking. Thank you.
Next speaker is Brian Martin. Brian, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm a resident who lives near the bowling alley. I had a number of, I've already said a number of things in writing, and I didn't want to repeat much of that, but I was wondering someone had mentioned outside of this meeting about arts funds. and people have been nostalgic about the bowling alley. And I was wondering if there's any way the architects can take some elements of the bowling alley, either the bowling alley's exterior or even the wooden floors of the bowling lanes themselves, and incorporate them either exterior or interior to the design. Car share, I thought that was very important. I was excited to hear that there's a possibility of electric car share. I think that will help a lot to have a number of car share designated spaces, and the city maybe should look into having even more in the area. Then related to that, I had a question was, how is parking allocated? Or is it tied to a particular unit, or is it just to the highest bidder? Could the first tenant reserve 6 spaces? Also, I wasn't sure if this is a rental situation or a condo. Somebody had mentioned condos, and I had that same question. The open space, I don't think that should be waived. We've seen how important that is during the COVID shutdowns, the open space. The building is, as someone who lives near the building and raised 2 children, one from birth here, we're basically in a parks desert, and so the closest playground is in Richmond. And so anything I don't think the waiver should be granted for the open space. I am glad to see that there's no driveway onto Adams and Clay. I think that's huge. That's much welcomed. And the Clay setback, I think, will be really nice. It's very narrow right now, and the 13-foot sidewalk is much appreciated. Albany, I think, does need more affordable housing, and I hope this will do it with supports for the neighborhood and the town with parking permits or whatever it takes to make sure that it's not a shock to the system of the neighborhood where this goes in, and where future ones go in that will likely have even less parking. Thank you.
Next speaker is Clay Larson. Clay, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Yeah, thanks. I sent a letter. I pointed out a couple of things. One of them was the seeker review. I believe staff have said they're going to look into this, and the city attorney is going to look into case law. I would be interested in getting a report. I hope they're a little more forthcoming than they've been with the city attorney's decisions regarding commissioner comments and also the presentations by staff. I also commented on general plan consistency. In the staff report, the consultant included an analysis of the project's consistency with Albany's general plan, basically by cherry picking several general plan policies, which at least in part appeared to support the project. The consultant's analysis was very incomplete. This is a very large, imposing development that's certainly not consistent with many aspects of the general plan. Obviously, the project exceeds all of the plan metrics, height, density. It also is not consistent with many of the goals and policies and actions described in the plan. I listed some of these in the letter, and you're free to look at it. I think this is a very large, imposing project, and it deserves to be controversial. Smaller projects in bigger cities have been controversial. And I think claiming in the general plan, in the report, staff report, that it's consistent with the general plan is disingenuous. I commented on the requested concessions. Basically, the state law requires that the applicant has to identify concessions that result in identifiable actual cost reductions to provide affordable housing. Basically, the developer here said, hey, it's going to be expensive to put, it's not free, basically. So it's not going to be free to put housing on rooftops. I mean, to put open space on rooftops. Apparently, they're doing it in one building. That's clearly not adequate explanation. And so I would hope that the city looks for a more detailed response. But I want to talk about a couple of things I didn't put in the letter. One, Ed Fields covered. It's going to be interesting to look at this when you're looking at the San Pablo specific plan to think about this project. the project consultants have suggested up to 100, maybe 150 units per acre. Will we get a 50% bonus on that? Or the specific plan has no impact, and then why do we need it? The final thing is parking. I see that staff added a sidewalk talk parking article, which suggests that cities limit parking in order to force people out of their cars. I think that's coercive and unfortunate. But what's very interesting is listening to the developers' comments. We're getting basically.
Next speaker, Lisa. Lisa, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi, this is Lisa Kleinbub, Albany resident. Just wanted to say I'm in support of a housing development project that will really add some housing to the city of Albany. And I think this is a good project. I think all of San Pablo Avenue should be used in terms of some more dense housing that we need in this city. I really like to see extremely low income units in any project that we have, because there are people who are seniors, there are people with disabilities who would utilize those units. And I'd really like to see that included in all projects and as we move forward. So I think that's all I want to say tonight, but thank you.
Next speaker, Ed Fields. Ed, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. A couple of comments. Seems that some of the commissioners have balked at the idea of all of the inclusionary units being very low income. I have not checked the government code this evening, but my recollection is in order to get the 15% density bonus, it requires that all 15% of the units be very low income, not low income. And so, you're suggesting that they switch some of them back to low income, which would be more in accord with our inclusionary housing ordinance. Doesn't make sense if they need that 50% density bonus. And along the same line, Margie was asking about that, and it's the same 15% that the city requires that they're using 15% of the base units to get the density bonus. So we would require it with or without the density bonus, but they can use them for the density bonus. And very low income, as was shown in the chart, is approximately $50,000 annual income for a family. And may not be so true now, but back when I was working, starting teachers didn't make $50,000. I mean, I hope they do now, but I haven't followed it, so I have no idea. So very low income isn't really so very low income. On a different note, even though no EIR is required for this project, it seems to me that it would be in everyone's interest for the city to do a traffic study of the effects of this project. With AC Transit asserting more priority for buses on San Pablo Avenue, I wonder what the queuing will look like for residents trying to make left turns in or out of the project, for example, during peak hours. So it might be something worth looking at. Thank you.
Next speaker is Amy Smollins. Amy, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi there. Regarding the reduced open space requirement, I would like to propose that the developer could help facilitate the building of the small human scale bridge over Cerrito Creek that would connect Adams Street to the Cerrito Creek path. That would, in effect, help connect people to open space. It would connect local residents, people traveling up Adams, which is approved as a bicycle boulevard, as Justin mentioned, and people at the Orientation Center for the Blind to Pacific East Mall. It would also create a connection that does not exist now for residents of all the Pier Street condos, so they could bike or walk on dedicated facilities to the rest of Albany. There are similar bridges across Codornices Creek at the ball field in Emeryville, and Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco counties connecting the Bay Trails to major roads. So that would be something that the developers could do to create a connection to open space. I encourage you all to read the commission and the applicants to read the comments of Kara Vujicic, who describes in great detail various incentives for car share, transit, bike share, including discounted or reimbursements for car share, preloaded clipper cards, real-time transit information in the lobby, and the more bike parking for individuals and families, the better. I mean, that would make it practical. These are ways to make it practical to own fewer cars, fewer or no cars. Remember that during and after COVID, a lot of people aren't going to be going back to work, to travel to work. They may continue to work full-time or part-time from home. This is across the street from BART. It's along multiple bus lines. There's easy access to bike routes north and south. So the ability to get where you want to go without a car is easy if we help make it so. I live on Keynes Avenue, also a block off San Pablo and a half a block off Solano. We all have a car parking space in our driveway, and some of us have garages. So the idea that we're going to be overrun by other people is not really valid because we have our own parking spaces if we live on these streets already. Now's the time for Albany to step up. We have to provide housing. We have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if we don't want fire season to become an actual season. So let's do this. I'm really looking forward to this project with that's pedestrian oriented, transit oriented, bike oriented, and people oriented. Thank you.
Next speaker, Nick Peterson. Nick, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hey, thank you so much. So Nick Peterson, I'm a longtime Albany resident. I'm also a member of the Albany Climate Action Coalition and sit on the Albany Climate Action Committee with the City of Albany. But I'm calling and supporting this project as a citizen. I know it's challenging. It is definitely a bigger project than we've seen in Albany, but this is the way we need to go if we're going to address problems that affect us all in the entire region and if not the world. So I think I commend the property owner for actually bringing this forward, starting this discussion. This is actually the ideal place for this particular project. And I think there are ways we can mitigate a bit of the impacts. I agree with the prior caller about incentivizing occupants of the building to minimize their car ownership. But undoubtedly, there will be a few more cars, and we need to be a little mindful of that. One suggestion I would have is that planning or the city consider a pilot parking management, meaning permit for the areas immediately adjacent on the street to this project. Would be a great opportunity to introduce parking management in Albany. There's absolutely zero management of parking in Albany. Everybody gets to park for free. You can own 6 cars like some people on my block do and park them all over the place. And if we had a parking system that limited that or charged people money for it or encouraged them to get electric vehicles instead of gas-powered vehicles if they're going to park them on our streets, then we could do some impact on how people drive around. Just having wild and open, free, own as many cars as you want and drive and park wherever you want is a thing of the past. That's not what we need to design our communities around now. I also will continue to support the project if it's 100% electrical, which I think it is. It seems to be that, although it didn't specifically say. And that at least there are charge points for every parking spot, or at least for half the parking spots. I think that's the new standard that Albany just implemented. And also encourage them to do rooftop solar to make it even less of an impact, and maybe even a net zero building, which would be absolutely fantastic. I also encourage them to put in mature 48-inch box trees along the adjacent streets. I like the amount of trees that they were showing. There could certainly be more greenery to help buffer and make it more pleasant. But this is a good project. This is where we need to go. It's close to transportation. It's on a major arterial. It stretches the general plan, which we need to do. The general plan is now out of date. So we need to look to the future. This will be here for the next 50 years, and it needs to be designed accordingly. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, Nico. Nico, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Hi, my name is Nico Nagel. I am an East Bay organizer with the Housing Action Coalition, a 20-year-old pro-housing nonprofit working across the Bay Area and spending some time up in Sacramento as well. Yeah, so I just want to say a couple of things really quickly. One, this, as projects go, this is a really great one. The Trachtenberg team who designed it are, you know, a group of note in the Bay Area, and so you know, as per their tradition, it looks really good. I want to second what lots of folks have also said, and sort of pull back in scope and just say that right, we live in a state where 25% of our carbon emissions come from folks just driving to work in the morning or driving to practice after work or on a weekend. And, you know, it's folks driving in cars that, you know, it's not their fault. It's what the infrastructure is set up for, but that's where our carbon emissions come from. And that's what's driving a good deal of our climate crisis. And we all have these shared goals of achieving, you know, a green future. And one way to do that is by putting housing near transit. And this project site is absolutely that. I also want to say, like, I respect the fact that this site means a lot for a lot of folks. And I get that 100%. And it's a bummer for sure. But you know, this can provide homes for a number of new folks and families in the area, and can also hit those state mandated RHNA numbers as well. So there's a lot of upside to this project. It's done well as it is. I'm sure through this public process, we'll see improvement as well, as usually is. So yeah, I'm absolutely calling in just to say this site makes so much sense for housing in the context of our shared housing shortage and the fact that our region needs every city to do its part to create those homes that people can live in. Thanks.
Next speaker is Pamela. Pamela, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
There was a victim of identity theft every 3 seconds. Somebody ran over $50,000 in my name. Here that all the key sources come to my location. My world was turned upside down. Your digital life may be in lots of places, but there's one place.
Pamela, would you like to speak?
I can't hear anything. I don't know if she muted or.
We'll disable this. Pamela, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand again. There are no other speakers.
Can we give Pamela one more try if she's still there, or?
Actually, we have one more speaker now, Kathy Madison. Kathy, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. I live in the Cornell Avenue side of San Pablo, and I would kind of piggyback on what Ed Fields was saying, that I would like the Transportation Commission and the zoning and the council to kind of put their heads together and do a traffic flow study on what it's going to be like with the buses and the cars on San Pablo, turning, you know, from Brighton onto San Pablo. that entrance from Brighton onto San Pablo is pretty tiny. And sometimes there's a lot, at peak traffic times, it's a big mess there. And we also have the middle school and the high school traffic that has been kind of minimal right now, but should pick up, once COVID is, in the rearview mirror. So I do think it could create pressure on the side streets, especially those streets that are next to the plaza, because we already have a lot of street, cut through traffic going to the plaza. So that's a really big issue, the traffic flow between Brighton, the schools, and the plaza and San Pablo that you really need to take a look at. I also am sorry to see the Albany Bowl go, because it was a big part of the community. And I think the San Pablo plan really needs to take a step back and look at public gathering and recreational spots, parks for all of these new residents to recreate in. And when we think about more buildings along San Pablo, there are options other than huge apartment buildings like this. This is a nice project. They seem to have put a lot of thought into it. But on some of the spots along San Pablo, instead of just, huge building after huge building, maybe there are some middle housing possibilities like townhomes, bungalow courts, courtyard apartments, something on a more human scale,
Next speaker, Kathy. Kathy, you have 3 minutes starting now. Oh, sorry. Just kidding. Next speaker is Cynthia. Cynthia, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Am I being on now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm agreeing with the majority of the ideas for having greater housing in Albany. I think that's very important. And I want to compliment the presenters on their plan. The only thing that I have to say about it is I wish it could look a little more attractive to the neighborhood. I feel that as it is, it could have more bays perhaps, or less massing that would make it not so boxy. And I think that that's what the previous speaker was mentioning about making things on a more human scale, to make it more appropriate for people to feel comfortable in. These are not places that people feel comfortable in. It's something that you sleep in and then you go. The need for additional open space, I think, is really important, and it is something that we do not have in Albany. An earlier speaker mentioned that Albany is dense already, and it is. It's true, we're not shoulder to shoulder, but it is a dense city. And one thing that we do lack is that we do lack green spaces within the city itself. We're very short of that. I would like to see something that took that into consideration. And other than that, I would like to see maybe the building look more unique. I think the architects do a good job, but I also looked at their other buildings that they've designed, and it seems like it's a repetition of the same style of design. And I would like to see something that made it more unique, more Albany, rather than another development that looks very similar with the same round windows and the same color breakup that really doesn't break up mass. But we do need more buildings. We do need more housing, but I would like to have some more thought into how it visually impacts everybody else in the city that does not live in the building. Thanks. Thank you.
We have a phone speaker with the last 3 digits 645. You have 3 minutes to speak, beginning now.
Hi, this is Shirley. My name is Shirley and I live near Albany Bowl. I have a few comments to jump around. I feel like the city would be giving a lot of concessions for very little in return. I don't agree with how high the building is. I think everything else around San Pablo and Adams Avenue is at most 3 stories high. So this will just dwarf people who live on the 500 to 600 block of Adams. And I wish there was more affordable housing. Maybe housing, we could give affordable housing to Albany teachers who already work in the city of Albany. I would like to see more open space, green space especially. There's just, it seems like a huge concession on green space. With regard to, I've heard a lot of speakers tonight talk about they want more housing, we need more housing, but to be honest, I feel like this is really a lot of housing for the exclusive. I think I saw somewhere in the plan that said this would be called the Aquatic. They already have about 4 or 5 buildings in Berkeley, and units there go for $2,400 to $3,400 a month, not including parking. So I don't know how many individuals or families could be able to afford this. And everyone screams for more housing, but it's not going to be affordable for many people. But on the other hand, there are some pros. I thank you to the developer for not putting any driveway onto Adams or Clay Street. And the 13-foot sidewalk outside on Clay Street is very much appreciated because I walk on that sidewalk almost every day and it's awful. It sucks. It's uneven. It's very, very narrow. You can't push a stroller on there at all. And I do appreciate how many parking spots the developer will be putting on this development, because street parking has been absolutely packed on Adams Street and Clay Street for many, many years. There are a lot of apartments on Adams Street, so you do have people with multiple cars, and there simply is not any more room for the additional individuals who would be living in the structure. Thank you.
Okay, there are no other speakers at the moment.
Okay, thanks. This will be last call then. If there's anyone else who has not yet spoken who would like to speak under public comment, now is your time to get in the queue. We will give it just another couple of seconds here. All right, last call, seeing none then. With that, public comment is closed and we'll turn it back to the commission for their comments. And Planning Manager Ann, Serge, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to clarify a couple points that came up in the public comments. This is a rental project. This is not a condo project. That's not been proposed as part of the scope. So it is in fact rental apartments. The question of public art was asked. Though it's very preliminary in this process, we do include a standard condition of approval that acknowledges that the developer is responsible for fulfilling that section of the city's municipal code. It's chapter 20.58. And that will require them to either pay an in lieu fee at the time of building permit issuance, or they can elect to incorporate public art on site. But that is something that we do include as a condition of approval. So it is factored into the project once it's approved. Another speaker had asked about the entitlements. So it's design review and density bonus. So it's the site planning, project architecture, that's what the commission is looking at, as well as that density bonus request for the concessions and waivers. Another question was asked about the base project calculation. And so this is actually within the city's municipal code. It's section 2040-030B. And that's where it specifies that the base number is the determinant in calculating the inclusionary requirement. So that's straight out of the city's municipal code. Once again, I want to give a plug for our e-notification for this project. So if there is anyone who wishes to stay informed, they can do so and go to the e-notification page and sign up to receive emails and announcements about this development project. And then lastly, there was mention of parking permits. And I just want to state that we do have provisions in the city's municipal code for parking permits. It's chapter 912. So it's in the traffic section of the municipal code. It's not part of the zoning regulations. So it's also regulated through the Transportation Commission. It's not regulated through the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we do have provisions on the books.
Great, thank you. And with that, any commissioner would like to kick things off, please go ahead and raise your hand. Sure, Commissioner Donaldson.
Okay. Yeah, I put together some notes. I kind of typed them up ahead of time so I wouldn't forget anything. And I guess I'll just sort of read through them as my comments. I'll probably cover 6 or 8 different topics here that I want to talk about about the project. Start out with the land use question. Obviously, the Albany Bowl has been there for like 60 years, and it's been a successful and a real community asset, and it's even a landmark in the local region. And the owners of the Albany Bowl were among the few commercial property owners actively participating in our general plan and zoning updates over the years, and they've always worked to keep their options open for redevelopment. And now is happening. The PU designations for the site, the PUD designations for the site allowed for residential or for full commercial redevelopment. And it wasn't too many years ago when I was led to understand that Orchard Supply Hardware was interested in this site. They went bankrupt now, and I'm really happy that this didn't become an Orchard Supply Hardware site. Yeah. And that we now have mixed use housing, which is actually the preference in our general plan policy regarding that. So this is the land use that we're seeing here, for me, is the correct land use. It's right. Density bonus, the state density bonus law, through the state density bonus law, this project proposes 21 very low income units. I really support that. The need for this low income housing is serious, and VLI units are absolutely the hardest to build, the hardest to find. But because there is a density bonus, our zoning regulations are going to be overridden in multiple ways. The heights will exceed our 38-foot height limit applicable to this site. Parking will be less than our requirement of 1 space per market rate unit and a half a space per affordable unit. And the zoning ordinance's daylight plane requirements will be waived, affecting a portion of Adams Street, actually. A few months ago we had 423 Evelyn, I did not agree with how the base project for the density bonus was determined. But with this project, the 138 unit base project appears to me to be correctly sized. I can find nothing in the general plan or the zoning ordinance that would modify the 63 dwelling unit base density for this site. So I'm happy that's here. The waivers of our height and daylight plane requirements are really significant, especially the height, going from 38 feet to a maximum of 67.5 feet on building B. But that is the price that cities have to, like us, have to pay in order to get affordable housing built by the private sector. And considering that our own affordable housing project currently in planning down between Pierce and Cleveland will cost, I'm told, about $750,000 a unit to develop, then these 21 VLI units may have a value approaching $16 million if they were to be built by the city. And they'll be affordable for 55 years. So that leads me to ask, are the trade-offs involved in the waivers and the concessions worth it? I actually think they are, and I could move forward with that on that line. Parking is a big issue. Parking, the project proposes 197 spaces. The staff report says 123 are required. The state density bonus law requires a half a space per unit, where Albany in our own zoning ordinance requires one space for market rate unit and a half a space for low income units. But of course, in this case, the state density bonus law prevails. But it is not realistic, and it inevitably results in underparking, and this project will be underparked by my calculations. I think that our zoning ordinance requirement of one space per unit is for multifamily housing is just about right. It could be a tad too low based on parking studies I've seen, but it is real. It is a real number right now. With the 197 project parking spaces proposed in the project instead of 123 allowed by the state density bonus law, I like that it's requiring 197 instead of 123. And I want to say that it would not cover, it would be better. I'd prefer it if it covered the entire parking need, which I calculate to be 186 for the market rate units, 11 for the BMR units, and 19 for the commercial area. That's based on our own zoning code, for a total of 216 spaces. So I think by our zoning code, the project should have 216 spaces. Accordingly, the project will be underparked by 19 spaces. That will add to the demand for on-street parking. And I note that the San Pablo Complete Streets Plan, which Justin referred to earlier, calls for the removal of some on-street parkings along San Pablo on the north of, say, Portland. And depending on what options and the complete street plans are implemented, there could be a removal of it as many as 16 spaces north of Portland in Albany. That would exacerbate the shortage of the parking shortage. So we've had some real good comments in the letters and tonight encouraging parking demand reduction, involving a number of TDM measures, incentives for transit use, incentives for car sharing. I guess Ann has told us that we really don't have the authority to implement those, which is unfortunate. I support all of those suggestions, and I support the infrastructure in the project to have charging for electric vehicles, and I would say both cars and bikes. And I think from what the applicant says, there will be some of that. To me, it was unclear. I did not know whether the parking would be unbundled, that is rented out separately, or bundled, that would be included in the rent. Isaiah said it would be unbundled. I prefer bundled parking for this project. As I have seen at 510 Centro in El Cerrito Plaza, unbundling encourages people park in the neighborhood in order to save from paying for a parking space. And I think that's a very real factor, and that it really adds to the congestion in their surrounding neighborhood. So I think the parking should be included in the rent, that the tenants should have the right to a parking space. And if they do not own a car, then they should have the right to sublease that parking space to someone else who can use it. I think that would be the right way to go. And then I know the parking list too, where there could be two cars in one space, really. I think those should be assigned to the 2-bedroom units, because that's probably where the demand for 2 cars is going to be coming from. So, design review considerations. I really like the fact that there are 2 buildings, and I like the fact that there's a driveway separating them at the Brighton signal. Very practical and a good approach, and I think that will you being able to use the signal will really ease the coming and going of the residents of the building. I'm generally okay with the massing. I think it's good that the architects have used the topography and the building positioning to reserve the perceived mass on the Adams Street side. As Isaiah was talking about, at the corner of Clay and Adams, the building will really only be 4.5 feet, 4.5 stories tall, not 5, and I think that helps. And then by setting back the 67.5 foot tall building, building B, 81 feet from Adams Street, it really helps the perceived mass of the building by a significant amount. It's very important. I think that's a very important and proper design choice. The FAR of this is 2.58. And I note that in our general plan, we say that you can go up to an FAR of 3 with density bonus projects. So this is well within the boundaries of the structural mass anticipated in our general plan. And it does not raise concerns for me. Similarly, I'm not particularly alarmed by the height at 67.5 feet maximum in building B. But I want to say, as I think Ed Fields had commented, this project convinces me that we should not let, I don't think we should let the base height go above 50 feet along San Pablo when we do the San Pablo specific plan. Because as we can see here, the state density bonus law will require structures as high or higher than this if we are ever able to get affordable units worked into those projects through the density bonus process. It's a very real process. It's very advantageous to developers right now. We'll see more and more of it. And if we have a very high base height limit on San Pablo Avenue, we will be seeing much taller buildings than this. I like the unit mix. And I like the fact that the studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms are very well dispersed. I think it's appropriate. I don't think 3-bedroom units, I mean, they might be nice, but I think this is probably the mix that is very rentable and will fit in the market for multifamily housing right now. So I'm in favor of that. Considering that there are the 2 separate buildings, I think it would be good if they were a little bit more distinctive one from the other. This could be done with color and or a little more variation and detailing. Maybe some changes in the landscape plan between the 2 sites, although that's not terribly significant visually, but it'll have some effect. Perhaps some different surface finishes between one building from the other. I leave that to the architect, and I really asked them to look at that. I think it'd be, I think I'd prefer it if they were a little more distinctive one from the other. Building, as I said before, building B is really so well set back from Adams Street, and I think that's great because I think that will mitigate any sun shadow impacts. I think they'll be very minimal from this project. And they are often a concern with taller buildings. And they only really occur in the early morning hours just because of the way the site is situated on a north-south axis. The waiver of the daylight plane the waiver of the daylight plane requirements doesn't bother me for this project. I'm okay with that. I am more concerned about the open space concession. As I calculated, the proposed project would really provide an average of 67.5 square feet of open space per dwelling unit. And I really think it should be higher. 100 would be great, but just anything a little bit higher, if anything they can do. On the plan sheet, they talked about qualifying open space and non-qualifying open space. I have to admit some confusion about that. I'm not quite sure what that means. It may mean that the non-qualifying open space is actually kind of usable or more or less usable quasi-open space. If so, I hope that's true. And effectively, maybe we'll have a little bit more than what's really qualified. Maybe more balconies are needed on some of the units. I really would urge the architect to work on getting more open space in the design. I note that the renderings show a restaurant in the southeast corner. Restaurants require more parking than general commercial, but I looked at the numbers and it looked to me like the commercial parking proposed would be adequate to have a restaurant in at least one of the commercial spaces. And I want to suggest that if they are that they should precondition the space for a kitchen. And I think they probably thought about that, but a restaurant would be a really good use. And even on that corner, exactly as shown in their plans, I think. And so let's make sure we have a building built that is restaurant ready, as you might say. So, and there are a few other little issues here. Drainage. I noted on the survey that there's a huge storm drain that runs diagonally across the site, 48 inches. I hope they plan to relocate that. They may be required to relocate that. And raises the question of what are the State Water Board C3 requirements, and are any little rain gardens, water storage facilities, anything like that going to have to be added into the plan, and can that be done without reducing the parking anymore? I hope it can. Public art. The site is close to the northern gateway of Albany. Gateway treatment is discussed in the general plan. Gateway treatment is discussed in the San Pablo Complete Streets plan. We don't have any, we planning and zoning don't have any jurisdiction over this. This will come later. But I really hope the project can find something dramatic and memorable that will sort of announce this as the entrance to the city. I'd like to see it be close to the creek, which is several hundred feet to the north of the northern boundary of this site. Another option might be to work with Bruce Beasley and get another Bruce Beasley sculpture, very dramatic, like the one we have at Belmont Villages on the southern boundary of the city. But anyway, a number of thoughts on that later, but it is certainly an important part of the project, and it's not something we can see right now. We had comments in some of the letters about student generation for the project. And so I looked at the data available that I could find from the American Planning Association, because I too was curious about that. And there's a big range of student generation rates that they report, but it is of interest, I think, and their data would indicate that the 100 one-bedroom apartments would generate between 3 and 9 students, while the 75 two-bedroom apartments would generate 14 to 45 students. So based on that, I think you could expect that this project would add in the range of 17 to 54 students to the Albany Unified School system. So those are my comments. Summarizing, I think the project is very well designed. I really like that Albany will be able to gain 21 very low income units. That's a big deal. And I really wish it met our parking requirements. And to that end, if we could, but we can't, I would like to eliminate some of the units to reduce the parking and to have a little bit more available open space. But I think the project is locked in under SB 330 and the Housing Accountability Act. And so I can certainly support it with what I've seen so far. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking up so much time.
Thanks, Commissioner. Would anyone like to follow that? All right, Commissioner Momin, go for it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the project sponsor for this study session. It was very useful to understand all the project specifics before we get into any formal commission hearings. I totally support this project. This is one of the most suitable infill sites in Albany, which has multiple high quality transit options within walking distance, and it also has a large parcel size that can support high density. And also, this is one of the few sites in the city. City of Albany is banking heavily on for fulfilling the mandatory arena obligation as part of the housing element. And this project not only brings very low income housing as part of the density bonus exchange, but also brings much needed market rate housing. We all need that in the way they are everywhere. I like the project design, very well designed. I like the thoughtful placement of building heights along the slope along San Pablo Avenue. I really appreciate the designers and the project sponsors for the clay street setback. It is really improving that side of the street, and also improving setback along Adam Street. I like the unit plans, very efficient design of the unit, and I appreciate there is no distinction between very low income units and market rate units, which is very good. I have some comments which are related to site planning, and some of them have already been discussed. I would still reiterate my feeling about surface parking along San Pablo, along Adam Street. I would really like having some low-rise active street frontage along that side. It would be good to have eyes on the street. It would also help in transitioning the scale of the building, even if the main building is 81 feet setback from the street. It is always good to have something right next to the sidewalk rather than having a big hole in form of surface parking. I think there is a great potential for the space that is between the two buildings. It could be really a central activity space. I understand the constraints that the easement brings. It would bring some vehicular traffic, but I think it could still be thoughtfully designed as a owner for a shadow or a shared street, we call it, that would be more pedestrian friendly and landscape to look and function more like an open space. There could be pickup and drop-offs for Uber and Lyft. There could be active open space elements with landscape seating, and with the lobbies on either side. This space could be really heart of the projects. I would recommend designers to not relegate that space just as a circulation space, but rather treat that more thoughtfully and use that as a kind of an open space. And with that, I think this space also should serve as the pedestrian connection between Adams Street and Brighton Avenue. With this, in current situation, right, people living on Adams Street would have to come all the way to Clay Street to come to San Pablo Avenue. So the pedestrian connection through this middle space would be really helpful in terms of improving the pedestrian activity and pedestrian connections. I'm happy that sponsors are exploring the possibility of bike path along that axis also. So I hope something positive happens through that, and then there will be a bike path connection to the Adams Street bicycle route, which will further connect with Cerrito Creek, and that could also be a good amenity that sponsors could market in their for the housing project. And then I'll come to some observations for the building articulation. I understand that designers have architecturally treated the two buildings in complementary way, and they complement each other in terms of articulation and finish treatment. But I think the same kind of treatment, same kind of articulation in both the buildings along the whole 475 feet length of the project looks really repetitious. Both the buildings look the same, with subtle variation in colors, which I think enhances the perception of height and bulk. I think we need more variation, and I think some commentator in public comments mentioned that, and Commissioner Donaldson also mentioned that. I would concur that I would really like to see them like two distinct buildings, completely different in architectural character and finish material treatment. I have some comments on building A. I like the tall corner elements. They look very good and they nicely bookend the building. But I think it would be helpful if there is variation in between the corner elements rather than having, equally very similar identical bays. There could be some variation. Maybe those bays could be 3 stories tall and the 5th floor could step back a couple of feet. That would also mitigate the impact of this big bulk along San Pablo Avenue. Maybe there could be some balconies, as much as the cost constraints allow. And then on Adam Street side, I really like the idea of providing stoops. That really activates that portion of the street and mitigates the effect of a real dead wall of the garage. And I also appreciate that designers have provided a lot of landscaping along the stoops. But despite all this, I think we still need a better transition of scale along that face of the building on Adam Street. Even if it is 4.5, floor high, that face still looks imposing over the stoops and the houses across the street. I had similar idea, as mentioned by Commissioner Pilch and Commissioner McLeod in the beginning, of reducing the height along that side of the building and putting that on to the San Pablo side, making it 6 floors tall. But I also understand the implication that would immediately make the building type 3A, which would have cost implication. But I would still request the designers and sponsor to look into that aspect and check what actually would be the cost implication, if they or can they have a mix of building type construction. Could part of building be type 3 and could part of the building be type 5? And then I also think that it would be helpful to articulate the lower 2 floors on that side to give a real look of attached row houses with actual porches in contemporary design rather than just having stoops in form of straight flights. It would be really helpful to really make them really look like townhouses, and that would have really better impact in terms of mitigating the bulk and also creating a better transition in terms of heights from the 3-story building across the street to the 4.5 story on the building project side. And so I think I also heard that designers have provided extra setback along that side, and so maybe they could use that to create those kind of townhouse facades, and then maybe upper 2 stories could be recessed a little more with a different architectural treatment, and that could really make a big impact on that side of the building. And in addition to that, maybe we should also provide stoops along Clay Street. There is not much scope there. We just have 4 units facing Clay Street, not actually 4, just 2. And so maybe we can have those 2 rear units along Clay Street have some stoops, so that would kind of, that same treatment could turn around the corner of Adam Street and Clay Street. And then you have nicely treated that dead wall of the garage with landscape and green wall. That should, I think, be maintained along with your widened Clay Street sidewalk and landscape treatment. And then for the building B, since both the buildings look so similar to each other, I think a large break in the building phase of building B would be really helpful in differentiating it from building A. I particularly like one of the projects designed by Trachtenberg Architects on 1200 San Pablo. This building is an inverted U facing San Pablo Avenue, and it has two sidebars of the U that are perpendicular to the street, and so they create a a better feeling of the bulk rather having two narrow tall building bars are always better than having one long parallel straight wall along the street. But I would not suggest exactly like that in our plan. I like the orientation of the courtyard. It gives nice views of Albany Hill. So we should keep the courtyard orientation as is, but we can try and pull the sidebars of building B out as much as we can to San Pablo, and the middle portion that connects those sidebars could be pushed back, make it recede in formal treatment as well as material treatment. That would make it completely distinct from building A, and it would have better articulation in terms of bulk. And then we really received some interesting suggestions from the residents of Albany. I had many of those similar suggestions, and I would like to reiterate some of those that I completely agree with. First of all is the green infrastructure. I'm not sure how much of that we can impose on this project as part of density bonus, but I would really urge the sponsors to look into that and have really good, well-functioning green infrastructure for the building. And one of them would be on-site stormwater treatment. The designers have shown a lot of planters, a lot of green space, but they haven't specifically mentioned if some of those could be used as filtration planters for stormwater management. So maybe they could look at that in that respect. I would also like if the project uses solar energy or solar hot water and gray water recycling. I would also like if the project uses all electric and not provide any gas. And then some of these commentators mentioned about bike infrastructure and bike route connectivity. I totally agree with that. There should be more facilities, more space for pickup and drop off for ride share, food delivery, space for micromobility. I support that. I support parking spaces dedicated for car sharing. And I also support residential parking permits for neighbors. That would mitigate some issues that neighbors would have in terms of parking. And if that goes with bundled parking for the project, that I think could be much more useful and helpful. I'm okay with reducing, if some of the parking is reduced in efforts to improve, bring more open space at grade, and also have the active frontage along Adams Street. And I would also like if the sponsors look at providing more 2-bedroom units or some 3-bedroom units. I think Albany is a family friendly city, and we should have more housing options available for families. And I think that's all I have. Thank you so much for a great presentation and great study session.
Thank you. Commissioner Pilch.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow Commissioner Moman because I think I agree with every single one of the things he said. So hopefully I can be a little efficient and not have to repeat them. I think one of the basic things that he was getting at architecturally is the imposing walls on on all of the sides of the buildings, and what we could do to make that more integrated to the neighborhood. That's certainly something that I thought of. So when I saw that there were opaque walls on the on the parking garage, I immediately thought that that certainly is not inviting, and that there at least should be open screening on the garage side. Number one, it will let in natural light to light those places. Number two, it will provide more of a feeling of the connection from the, I know it's not a pleasant place, a parking garage, but at least you feel a little bit more connected with the building. It feels more open to the neighborhood when you've got the garage at least exposed a little bit. And I'm not sure I understood Commissioner Momin's all of his treatments that he was suggesting, but they sounded right. And I would like to, one of the issues that I have with the open space in this project is it's all closed off to the public. It's all private open space. And what I would love to see, San Francisco is the gold standard for this. San Francisco, at least in their commercial buildings, large commercial buildings, requires public open space. And in projects like this, you can have public/private open space by having some of the open space on the ground floor and allowing the public to use it as well as the residents of the building. I don't know how that would be accomplished here, but with having just the 4 imposing walls on each building, kind of really blocks off the public from that. Having the large space between the buildings opens it up a little bit, but then that's all parking for motor vehicles. So that's not a place where people will want to go or linger. So any treatments to allow, any, and I'm not an architect, I don't know what these things are called, but bulb ins of the buildings, so that some of that could be used for just a little plantings or a bench or some other way of regaining some of the space from the parcels for the public, or at least for the public to see a nice display of plantings or something would be nice to do. But I'd say I'm not going to go much farther in that direction, since I'm not an architect, and you should listen to Commissioner Momin. And this is one of the lots, one of the places in Albany which is the most transit friendly. You can hardly get more transit friendly. You just go north a couple of lots and then you're most transit friendly. You're closest to El Cerrito BART. But this is the northern end of Albany, close to El Cerrito BART, on the bus lines. And it's also got all your retail right there. So this is absolutely a place where you can reduce parking. And while I understand that you want the commercial and the retail to be successful by allowing enough parking, think about, all the parking that's not happening on Solano Avenue right now and all the success of the restaurants there. People are going to those restaurants in droves and their parking has been reduced there. So consider that. I would prefer to see less parking than more. And I do also bemoan the fact that the portion of Building B that is on Adams Street is a big parking lot. And I don't think that's very friendly to the people who live on Adams Street. And I would rather see something developed there. And I don't know what would pencil out, but perhaps what if you just kept the configuration exactly as it is, put a podium on top of that parking, and then put open space on top of that podium, or maybe put a floor or two of housing on top of that podium, or maybe even a floor or two of housing and then open space on top of that. But it sure seems like you could just stick a podium on top of that parking lot and then get even more units in or do whatever with it. And then that would be friendlier to Adams Street than just a parking lot. And speaking of Adams Street, I do think that I would insist on bicycle and pedestrian access from Adams Street through the extension of Brighton, Brighton through the parking lot, that people be able to, on bicycles and walking, be able to access Adams Street that way. I think we need to absolutely, this is a chance for us to, if we don't maximize the opportunities for alternatives to to car ownership, we've done the city a disservice. So I'm pleased to see a lot of bicycle parking. We've got to make sure that the pedestrian access in and around this is very good. The car sharing and electric car sharing, that's all very good. So we need to not lose those things. Those things are very important to this project. And so I've got a bunch of notes here above me. I'm going to try to go through them quickly, but I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Yeah. I talked about open space. In terms of the bicycle parking, I see the stacked bicycle parking suggested. It's certainly a great way to maximize the bicycle parking, but it's not usable by everyone. Not everyone can take their bike and put it up there on top. Even ones that I've used where the rack on top slides down to help you load your bike on, those can be very daunting for those who are either not physically fit or older, or just for many people. So I'm not sure you want to use a lot of those. Even I think hanging a bike on a wall can be better than the stacked bike parking. Also, very important to consider that a lot of people are using longer bikes, bikes that don't have your usual configuration. Either they have a trailer or they have what's called a long tail, where they have the long extension, where they have the extension on the back to fit kids sitting on the back or luggage. So we need to consider parking that's long enough for those types of bicycles. And mentioning gold standards again, I believe these are secure. The bicycle parking is going to be in secure cages that are accessible only by the residents. Hopefully, that's what I would expect. But a gold standard to that is that you contract with someone like BikeLink, and you get actual individual access lockers, and they don't actually take up a lot of space, but you can have a completely enclosed space for your bicycle and not worry about any any damage to your bike, or not to mention theft. So that would be something to consider. I do echo the comments of the previous commissioners that it would be better if the buildings were distinct, and I also would love to see you incorporate some color. I hate the idea that the palettes are always brown and gray, and not inoffensive to everyone and maybe unattractive to everyone. So I would love to see color, a little bit of color here and there. I think could really spice up the looking of these buildings. Neighborhood parking permits, we can do those. So if parking really is a problem where we don't have too much, we can do neighborhood parking permits. E-bike charging, yes, we should consider that. I don't know a lot about that myself, so but if that's a coming thing, we should accommodate it. I would not suggest another Bruce Beasley, our art piece. Although it's beautiful, it's also a bit generic. It doesn't really say anything about Albany. But I love the idea of saving maybe the Albany Bowl sign or pieces of the bowl and using that as some of the public art. I think that you would get a lot of public support by doing that. The applicants would. And I think I might have gotten everything in that I wanted to say. I'm sure I've forgotten something, but I'm very much in favor of this project. I think that with a bunch of tweaks, you can get it even better. And I'm very happy that my fellow commissioners are also unhappy about the parking in back on Adams and the reduction in open space. So let's continue to explore both of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. Disagree with a little bit of it, but anyway, just to get started, I'd like to thank the applicants for bringing this forward to us. I think it's a much needed housing project for Albany and for the region. You know, we could all lament the Berkeley or the Albany Bowl going away. I spent many a birthday party there with my kids and others. But it's not coming back. There's no real question of saving the Albany Bowl, as I've seen a lot of comments on social media. It's kind of had its day. And we're moving forward with this project. And it's nice to see. And my only regret is that it's not coming a little later when we could have increased our development standards to allow more units. I think it would, this site, it's big enough, plenty big enough to support more units. It's not really a question of putting the units on there. And as is, there's plenty of space, but it's, you know, configured in a way. I mean, my other disappointment is the parking lot. This is a kind of really old way of designing and building, which is a sea of asphalt around your building, kind of a suburban office park typology with that parking plan. I'm rather disappointed in it. But anyway, back to the kind of the big picture. Housing is really important for us and for our region. We need it for our own city's economic vitality. It's a good economic growth engine for the city. It brings more people to our local businesses, gives more younger and people on smaller incomes a chance to live here. I really support the very low income units. I wouldn't support changing them to moderate or other types of low income units. I think it's hard to get the very low income units. So as long as we're getting those, I think that's great. You know, in general, it would be great to get more, but I don't know how to do that. It doesn't really work with the way this whole structure is set up with the state density bonus law and our current for-profit driven method of delivering housing like this. So I really do support this. This is the ideal place to put a housing development on a transit corridor that's very, very well served by transit. You know, we have excellent bus service. We have walkable to shopping centers. BART is so close, you can walk there in probably 10 minutes. So it is the ideal place to try to do transit-oriented development. And if we're doing transit-oriented development, I think we should really do it and not provide the same number of parking spaces that is typical. I think we need to be much more forward-looking. Part of what we're trying to do is reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce vehicle miles traveled. There's a concept of induced demand with parking, and a lot of studies and literature show that by providing more parking, you get more cars. It's pretty simple. You provide vehicle infrastructure, you get more vehicles. You provide bike and active transportation infrastructure, and this is shown in cities all over the world that are transitioning to more bike mode and active transportation mode, then you get more of that kind of activity. So this is a real opportunity to push this idea and to push the envelope on that and make it work. But you have to provide real alternatives, and those include some of the suggestions in the letters we've seen, car share facilities on site, perhaps. We should be working with different nonprofits that can help design the systems, design the micro-mobility solutions. There can be car share on site. I think the bike rooms should be, as one letter suggested, 1.5 bikes per unit. I think there should be a lot more provision for cargo bikes and charging cargo bikes. And I've said it before that I think electric bikes are the urban vehicle of the future. They barely take up space, they don't pollute. And with the cargo bike, you can get just about anywhere in 10 minutes. I've been reading about the concept of the 15-minute city, which is you can get everywhere you want within 15 minutes by foot or bike and get everything you need. And Albany is the perfect candidate for that kind of development. It's also, I think we should be reducing the parking quite a lot. I really don't get this trade-off where we can't have open space for people, but you're using all your common open space on the ground for cars. So that really bothers me, I have to say. And I want to touch a little bit on some of the other aspects, but I think in general, we really should be pushing the transit-oriented development aspect of this. This is the ideal place to do it, and I would really encourage the applicants to do a transportation demand management plan, work with Transform on a green trip certified project, show us what it's really going to take, show us why you really need that much parking. Parking's super expensive, you said it yourselves. Reduce the parking, save that money, put it towards other things that are much more valuable to me, which is actual units of housing, other amenities, either outdoor space or more retail space. I don't want to accept at face value that you think you need all this parking. Prove it to us. Show us, and do the transportation demand management plan, work with Transform or some other organization. Getting to the building site, the other thing that I would encourage would be to have the Brighton entrance much more pedestrian and bike friendly. When I just look at it from the street view, it's just another parking lot between two buildings. I think it should not be a parking lot between two buildings. That should be a pedestrian and bike plaza. That the lobby should be a little bit further away from the corners. The corners are great retail, cafe, or restaurant space. That's where I could see outdoor seating. You take away a few of those parking spaces and make outdoor seating for a restaurant or a cafe, and then you're giving back to the city. You're not just giving us more parking spaces to look at, you're creating a vibrant corner, little vibrant area between the buildings. Make it a destination that people would want to walk to, want to go to. Some of those car spaces also in that area could be a bike corral for short-term visitors that would be between the buildings, much more visible, less prone to theft. Would encourage people visiting your building and your retail spaces to park their bikes there. The bike rooms need to have electrical outlets for electric bike charging. You're way exceeding the parking demand or parking requirements. So why don't you exceed the bike requirements to an equal degree or better? We're really trying to build towards a better urban future that is walkable, bikeable, without cars. Cars create congestion, noise. It's not conducive to a great urban environment. All great cities that you would want to visit, you don't go there because they have traffic and cars and parking. You go there because they have great walkable environments. So that's what we're trying to do here. I agree with a lot of comments about the blank walls in the back. I think the building heights at 6 stories are absolutely fine. It's perfect for the scale of a boulevard. I would really like to see building A also be 6 stories. I do understand some of the cost constraints, but I would appreciate if you would explore that. Other comments. I really would encourage the building to be all electric, including restaurants. There's a lot of great equipment now for restaurants that works just fine. Induction cooking, top restaurants in the world are going with induction cooking. There's no reason that these restaurants or whatever could come in here could not use all electric. It could easily be all electric. The equipment's there. You save a lot of money on your gas pipe infrastructure. You don't need any gas meters. You just save all that money and put it into electric equipment. And I would also encourage you to do electric equipment for your heating, space heating and water heating. The technology is great, much more efficient than gas. Part of our climate action plan is to reduce or eliminate our fossil fuel use. And in fact, the state may be phasing that out in 10, 15 years. So if you have gas, you may be stuck with a stranded asset in 10 or 15 years and have to pull out all your gas equipment anyway. so you need to look to the future in that sense too, and help us reach our climate action plan goals. Let's see, what else? I'm really hesitant to, I really, I think there should be more open space, whether it's by taking up more outdoor space and removing some of the parking spaces or on the rooftop somehow. COVID has proven to us it's very difficult. People staying at home all the time, people need to get outside and have some greenery and some relief from being stuck indoors all the time. I think it just makes a better project. I think it will also make a more marketable project. So, if you're not providing the open space, I think that's also a marketing liability for you. So you really should think strongly about that. Amenities are important in terms of your marketing and the willingness of people to live there and enjoy it and want to stay long-term as tenants. So I would really consider that. What else? Let's see. I think you need to provide the pro formas for the cost reductions. We haven't seen that. That would be helpful for us. What else? I agree with some differentiation on the two buildings won't hurt. And I would appreciate some differentiation from your similar buildings in Berkeley. I see a lot of them. They are very attractive. I do like them, but I would like to see something. I would like to challenge you to do something maybe a little different here, a little more distinct. Something that people say, oh, okay, well, we know it's Albany now. It's not just the same continuation of the same style we see in other cities. I would encourage, and perhaps some balconies would be helpful as well in terms of varying the facades. I think I'm running out of things to say. There's always a lot more to say on a lot of these things, but I look forward to working with you, with the applicants, and seeing how you can modify it and bring this to us at our next session. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Commissioner McLeod. And I'll just round things out here in terms of commission comments for tonight. And I have about eight points here, so I won't reiterate what my fellow commissioners have said, but I do agree with much of those points, particularly the architectural ones. But here we go. So first up, I do agree that this is, the site has been identified as a potential housing site in the general plan, and I do think it's a great site for a high-density mixed-use housing project. So I just want to sort of put that out there. The city is certainly in need of very low-income units. We often don't get those. We often are not meeting our RHNA goals as it relates to very low income units. And really the only way to produce enough market rate housing or enough very low income units is to cross subsidize with the construction of market rate units. So I think this is a great project, and particularly that this is going to be a rental project. I think that is even a better combination here. Jumping into some of the architectural comments here, I do agree that I think the height's a little static as it walks up the Clay Street elevation. I would be supportive of finding ways to articulate the height. Ideally, I'd like to see a reduction in height along the Adams Street frontage where there is building volume. But similarly, as I sort of was alluding to in some of my comments at the beginning, I completely agree that the surface parking lot on the northern portion of Adams seems off to me. I think a better project would be to reallocate some of the massing from the southern portion of Adams Street and build up some massing and a street wall on the northern portion. So whether that's through townhomes or just an extension of the building volume with a similar architectural typology of what they're building, some sort of way to just reallocate mass. By no means is it a request to reduce the mass of the project as a whole, but just to reallocate to create a street wall, but also to drop down the height if possible on the Adams Street frontage at the southern portion. As it relates to the San Pablo Street frontage, I do think that the Clay Street corner could be more prominent. I think it is really the sort of highlight corner of the project. And whether that's just through a taller parapet at the corner or some sort of color differentiation or fenestration pattern or something, I think providing a little prominence at that corner sort of ground the building's corner location there would be great. And similarly on the northern end, I don't feel like right now the architecture, and again, I know this is a study session, I don't anticipate that the architecture is fully baked at this point, but the general plan does indicate that this really should be the northern gateway to the city. And so far, it just sort of looks like a mid-block infill building. And so I think, and certainly the good news is I think we've got an architecture team here that is very capable of really making sort of a placemaking component of this building, and to really have this be some sort of northern gateway. And whether that's through an art treatment, again, the fact that there isn't an art fee, I would encourage the sponsor, although it's often not required to be figured out at the planning commission stage, but to pursue on-site art, which will kind of solve potentially a couple of things. One, it could be an opportunity to really make this building different, to potentially sort of celebrate the bowling alley history at this site, whether it's through murals or some other sort of demonstration, and also to make this building a little bit more unique. I think those were all points that people have called out through other various comments, and I think there's a way of maybe incorporating the otherwise already required on-site art fee and turning it into a real positive as it relates to some of those aspects of sort of building architecture at some level. I would also encourage, as was sort of alluded to from other commissioners, some greater articulation along the street facades, either through balconies, like inset balconies or projecting balconies. And I think that would also serve two purposes. One, to sort of break up the buildings a little bit on those facades, bring a sort of that human aspect that I believe one of our public commenters mentioned, but it also increases public open or private open space. And I know a waiver is being sought from that, but I do think there could be a way of pursuing that as a way to satisfy all of those aspects of the project. Again, I know we are kind of butting up against the limitations of SB 330 and not increasing costs on the project. But again, I think we're working with a good architecture team who can sort of take that feedback and look at ways where it's a relatively cost neutral change to the project. Before we see the final version, and again, I'm pretty confident that the version that we're seeing in terms of the private usable open spaces are a bit of placeholders and haven't been fully thought out through landscape architecture plans, but I do have an expectation that those spaces will be accompanied by landscape architecture plans and fully programmed, and not just passive green spaces, sort of the trees that are plopped in on the drawings that we have now. I assume that's just a placeholder. So just want to let the architects know that before the final approval documents, there definitely should be landscape plans that are programming these spaces for our final approval set. Almost to the end here, as some folks have suggested, I think the idea of a thoughtful TDM plan would be great. TDM plan to me doesn't mean an extra cost in any shape or form, but I do think it's a way for the project to basically advertise its proximity to alternative transportation options, to market itself as being a green building, which it's going to have to do in many ways anyhow, marketing itself as 20% on-site EV charging stations installed, perhaps, a safe routes to school map that's marketed. Things that seem like a pretty light touch, but I think would go a long way in sort of pulling together all the different features of the buildings that can be leveraged into a TDM plan. TDM plans can mean a lot of different things. They don't always have to mean some sort of subsidy, but I would just encourage the applicant to think about that before the final approval of what type of a TDM package could you present, whether that's an added cost or just more of a pulling together all of the requirements that you're going to have to do anyhow and packaging them together. And then last but not least, this is a fairly small one, but I do think it's helpful, especially for the public, is in the final package of plans that we get, it would be really helpful to have elevations and renderings that actually show outlines of the adjacent buildings. There's been a little of that through some of the renderings and outlines, but I think especially when we're looking at proper elevations, to show really the full outlines of the adjacent buildings and across the street, so that neighbors get a really good, realistic sense of this building in the context to the buildings that they're used to seeing on a daily basis. That wraps all of my comments. Again, I'm sure we will have more thoughts as the days and weeks go on and when the formal applications come in, but I'm hopeful at least we gave the applicant probably more thoughts than they were even hoping for. So that wraps my comments, and I guess I'll just open it back up. Are there any commissioners who have any final thoughts? I know we're at a late hour in the evening here and want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if there are any final thoughts before we adjourn our meeting tonight. Oh, Anne first, yes.
I just wanted to say one thing that I forgot to mention earlier. There was a reference made by one of the public speakers to an article that was posted on the agenda, and I just wanted to acknowledge that that article actually came from Commissioner McLeod. He had asked that that be submitted just as an informational item as it relates to this particular project. So that wasn't staff that was putting information out there. It was on behalf of Commissioner McLeod, who requested that it be part of the record.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Any final thoughts going? Oh, yes, Commissioner Pilch.
Yeah, I'll just try to be real quick. One is that Commissioner McLeod said some great things about parking and making sure we have good alternative transportation. So I appreciate those. Personally, we don't have the data. We don't have a study that shows us how the residential multifamily units in Albany are being parked these days. We just don't know. I suspect they're not being full. In fact, we know that one of the residential developments has removed its stacked parking because of lack of demand. And in my informal studies, when I peek down at the garages that I can see in multifamily units, I don't see full parking lots. So, but enough has been said about that, and I don't want to beat that dead horse. But I do have a question for my fellow commissioners. A number of people have talked about the gateway, the northern gateway, and this property is not at the border. So I'm a little confused as to why we're asking that it have some gateway elements to it, perhaps because it's close enough to the border. It's a question for you all.
Okay. Is it okay? Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, Nick, I understand that. In the general plan, I think this whole area, that PRC zone, which does extend through the car wash and the Sutter Health, I think that zone goes all the way to the creek. And so that's why that zone is shown as being a northern gateway. But you're right, this building is several hundred feet away from the creek, which is the boundary.
Okay, that's what I might have missed, is the zone. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep, Commissioner McLeod.
Sorry, just to
Sure.
follow up on the article I asked to be posted. Basically, it does say that when there is lots of parking, then people buy cars and own cars, and when there's less parking, people own fewer cars, coupled with other alternatives, bike share, car share, bike rooms, etc., and transit. So this is the perfect place to implement that. So just wanted to follow up with that. It's worth reading. It's based on a study, a UC study, and there's lots of other literature that support that.
Could I make a comment? I don't think I did see that. I must have missed it. Maybe I didn't check the site soon enough or something. But I thought we weren't supposed to do that. Or do we go through you, Anne? Or what are the rules now?
In effect, if you have articles or other informational points you want to share, articles was the example that was provided. That's fine. We just post it as part of the agenda packet. And so, if on a future packet there was an article that related to a project that was under review, we can include that as information.
Okay.
But I guess the clarifying point, Ian wasn't the author of that article. It was a journalist.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there are no other follow-up comments from commissioners, we will go ahead and move on from this item. So that concludes the item on the mixed-use development at 540 San Pablo Avenue. Takes us on to item 9 on our agenda, which is next meeting. Next meeting will be April 14th, same time, same place. And with that, thank you everyone for your patience tonight. We are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Mhm.